Good morning and welcome to the December 2019 MTA board meeting. We're going to start with a safety briefing and then with public speakers. Lucille.
Your safety is of foremost importance to the MTA. Therefore, we ask that you listen to the following instructions. In the event of an emergency, notify emergency personnel in the room and 911 should be called. If an alarm sounds, wait for a public address announcement and follow instructions. If told to go to another floor or to evacuate the building, leave all unessential items behind and use stairwell A just across the main hallway or stairwell D down the hallway past the elevators. An automated external defibrillator, AED, for use by trained personnel is in the main hallway just past the elevators. Thank you and have a safe day.
Good morning, everyone. We are starting our public hearing. I would like to remind everyone and all of our public speakers that in the interest of time and fairness, we limit everyone to 2 minutes. Please be aware of the clock in front of the room and the warning light you will see reminding you that you have 30 seconds left to conclude your remarks. Our first speaker this morning is Vincent Padula, followed by Assemblywoman Paulin.
All right, wonderful.
You may begin, sir.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vincent Padula. Glad to be here and present to the board. I am a native New Yorker who's also visually impaired, a homeowner, a father of 5, an adaptive technology specialist, a teacher for the Department of Ed, and a U of T rep. So all that to say, I've been utilizing Access-a-Ride for the last 20 years, and I have to say, the last 2 have been the most successful for me as a citizen here in New York. Our great city has become so difficult to travel with, all the new folks that live amongst us, and the on-demand program has been a great success for me, especially as a union rep or an adaptive technology specialist. When a need arises, I can make it my way around the city quickly and effectively. And I know there's dollars and cents here that we're considering. It's always what that comes down to, right? The cost of doing business. And I have to say, each Access-a-Ride trip, the data is back. The traditional service is $80. These on-demand trips with current TLC providers are $35. So the cost of trips is cheaper. It's a bargain. The members, the patrons who utilize the system enjoy it and have commented, for the most part, it's been working. Now we're hearing the first group is going to be added to with new parameters. We're going to limit trips. We're going to have $15 caps. And it's instead of taking a thing that finally works, the only problem with the on-demand program is that it was successful. So we have a successful program that is going to be changed. I'm here to plead with the board and say, please continue the on-demand service. All the data's in. It works. Thank you. My name is Vincent Padula.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Assemblymember Paulin, followed by Jessica De La Rosa.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Assemblymember Amy Paulin. I represent the 88th Assembly District, which is in Westchester County. And I'm here today on behalf of 26 Assembly members. Yesterday, we presented the board with a letter. I think most of you hopefully received it in your email. And also, of course, it's addressed to our esteemed chair. I'm just going to make a couple of points because you already have the letter. And just to let you know how important making the projects for Metro North in parity with the other transit systems is to this group of legislators. First, rolling stock. We believe that 80 to 90 cars is not enough in this capital plan. We need all 200, which is an additional $595 million. The reason we believe this is because those cars were built in the mid-'80s. There are no replacement parts, as you well know. In 2013 alone, 20 cars had to be taken offline just to have enough parts. If that is the continued pattern, we are going to have a severe capacity problem, never mind the problem that we'll have because the useful life of 2018, a year ago, will be ridiculous if we put the 120 cars into the next plan, which means, as you well know, the delays that we see 2 to 3 to 5 years to get a car would mean that these cars would be running 10 to 12 years past their useful life. We'll see breakdowns, we'll see problems, which leads me into third track. Because of the storm conditions increasingly getting worse,
Please kindly conclude your remarks.
we will. We need to see more power stations. We only have 2 in the last plan. We only have 2 slated for this plan. It's absurd that there was one that was even planned for that is not included in this plan. We need all 10. Safety, cameras, we're suicide prevention, training, but we're not putting cameras in. They're cheap. We need them. And 39 of our stations will not have them.
Thank you so much. Please
you.
kindly conclude. Our next speaker is Jessica De La Rosa, followed by Mr. X.
Hi, everybody. Good morning and happy holidays to you all. My name is Jessica De La Rosa. I'm the Systems Advocate at the Brooklyn Center for the Independence of the Disabled. So the other day, the Strap Hangers campaign just released its 10 best and worst transit lists for the past decade. And the on-demand pilot made both lists, and they're right. As you have all heard many times, on-demand has been a life changer for many persons with disabilities, including me, in a transit system that often fails us. But now, proposed restrictions would ruin this program. I'd be able to get to work using on-demand only 8 days out of a work month, and with the $15 cap, I'd only get as far as the FDR Drive, which I think would be a challenge getting out of the cab. Here's why on-demand works. At much less cost to the MTA per ride, I attended a meeting yesterday that ended early. On the traditional blue and white vans, I would have needed to waste an hour and a half waiting for my ride. And that's assuming it came on time. And as we all know, yesterday was pouring and cold. But because of the freedom and flexibility of on-demand, I was able to get on my way quickly. Aside from on-demand, if we had to put our own best 10 list together, we'd include the decision to include accessibility as one of the 4 pillars of Fast Forward, because this shows the new thinking at the MTA, which we applaud. But on the worst 10 list, the MTA's decision so far not to make a legally binding agreement in our lawsuits on subway access and elevator maintenance. We need these settlements so that the commitment to accessibility lasts after all of you have left the board. Indeed, one board member, Ronica Vanterpool, is in her last meeting today. Ronica has devoted time, energy, and considerable talents to riders, including my community. We thank you deeply for your good work and wish you good luck. We'll miss you, and we thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. X, followed by Lisa Daglian.
To Veronica, I didn't know this was your last board meeting. I was hoping you could stay on a little longer. I enjoyed watching you embarrass Thomasina years ago. That's another story. To Robert Foran, thank you for that presentation you made at the previous board meeting. It shows the MTA executive director has a one-track mind and a negative attitude. How he behaved at City Hall, which became the bingo hall, former home to ECW, also proves he has a one-track mind and a negative attitude. How he treated me at a previous board meeting also proves that. How he treated me in the previous month also proves he's unconcerned about the MTA, which is why I could call it money thrown away, not Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Last 16 years, I saw 7 executive directors. I saw Kathy Lab, who could pass for Penelope Pitstop. I saw Elliot Sander, who could pass for Michael Bloomberg. I saw Jay Walder, who could pass for Frank Perdue. I saw Joe Loda, who could pass for Wes Craven. I saw Uncle Tom Prendergast, who passed for King Kong Bundy. And now I'm seeing someone who looks like Dusty Rhodes without Sapphire, Bubba Ray Dudley, and Ted Turner without Jane Fonda. So, based on what I've seen so far, I feel it's time for, I feel the MTA executive director, the current MTA executive should resign. He should just throw in the towel like the Golden Boy Arnold Scotland, which did for Bob Bagley at Massacre many years ago. Because he's not cutting it. He succeeded his predecessor in the last 6 to 8 months, and what has he done? Nothing. Nothing but cut me off at a board meeting and then ask the MTA Police Department to help him move on his parade. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Lisa Daglian, followed by John Padula.
Hi, good morning. My name is Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCAC. We once again extend our best wishes to Commissioner Vanderpool, and also wish to thank Helene Fromm and Midori Valdivia for your service to riders over the years, and we wish you both well. The actions that the board will take today, most significantly around the financial plan, will have a far-reaching effect on riders for years to come. We continue to urge no cuts to service. At the same time, the cost of operating the system that will be built into the new capital plan must be included in the conversation so we can all see the big picture. That will help us make the case for new sources of dedicated operating revenue so we don't see service cuts down the road. The capital program is not on the agenda but looms large. We'll get a presentation on the forensic audit, which will not require rewriting the 2024 capital plan, but will require new processes, including around the 20-year needs assessment and transparency, and for a 45-day comment period for which we've long advocated. So the good news is no delay to the program. Better news, an improved way of doing business that we hope will include robust public input. Also missing is any discussion of the emergency debarment regulations, which were set to expire yesterday and which we believe will be extended again. We had hoped there would finally be an opportunity for public discussion around the rules, which go beyond the legislative mandate and automatically debar contractors from doing business with the MTA, and by extension other state agencies, if their projects go over budget or over schedule by more than 10%. As we wrote in May, contractors must be held accountable, but so too must the MTA for the decisions it makes. Given the scope and complexity of the 2024 capital plan, getting the rules right is more important than ever, or we face the potential of increased costs and timelines built in by a dwindling set of contractors willing to do business with the MTA. Thank you and happy holidays to all.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Padula, followed by Bradley Brashears.
Thank you. Yeah. Where's the mic? There we go. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Padula, and I'm an administrator for the Department of Education. Access-a-Ride was an absolute debacle until we were able to book on-demand trips through the eHail program. Traditional carriers have been making piles and piles of cash at $80 a trip on the backs of marginalized disabled citizens. In comparison, Curb trips are averaging $36 per trip for a superior product that actually works. How is Curb too expensive? Your data's biased. Your sample is not a random sample. Instead, users are chosen from a waiting list. Of course, your trip numbers are going to go up. Your 1,200 on-demand users are power users. Did you guys go back and compare the current data with their prior paratransit data? If there is a variance in usage, I still contend that over time, there's going to be savings. At $36 a trip versus $40 a trip, I'm personally averaging $40 a trip then and now. So over the long haul, I'm saving the MTA money myself. More importantly, I'm able to live my life with the same autonomy and dignity as every other person in this city. So this is basically a civil rights issue because your proposed restrictions are further isolating this community from the access and opportunity that every other citizen has access to. So let's cut the red tape, folks, and get our heads out of our back pockets. It's 2019. Disabled or not, it's about time we start treating everyone fairly and give equal access to everyone in this city. My father raised me to be a leader, not a follower. Chairman Foy, you want to tell our mayor that you are following other cities' examples? Well, I'm embarrassed for you and our mayor, sir. This is New York City. We should be leading by example, teaching these other cities a thing or two about true equal access, respect, and facilitating opportunities for everybody in this city.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Bradley Brashears, followed by Tremel Thompson.
Good morning. My name is Bradley Brashears, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the PCAC. Today, I'll be speaking in support of Commissioner Vanderpool's remarks that the outer borough transit funds should not be used for toll rebates, but for transit. The entire point of congestion pricing is to get people out of their cars to relieve congestion, get them onto transit, and support much-needed transit investments, which will be paid for by funds raised through hard-fought legislation. Rebating tolls is counterproductive to the envisioned concept of congestion pricing. The New York City Transportation Assistance Fund legislation reads, monies in the outer borough transportation account shall be used for the exclusive purpose of funding the operating and capital cost of Metropolitan Transportation Authority facilities, equipment, and services in the counties of Bronx, Queens, Queens, and Richmond, and any projects improving transportation connections from such counties to New York County. It goes on to say, funds may also be used to fund a toll reduction program for any crossings under the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Let's be clear. It says funds may also be used to fund a toll reduction program. That use is not required under the legislation, and our position is that it should be used to fund transit improvements and not to reduce tolls. Meanwhile, New York City Transit is redesigning the Bronx and Queens bus networks to improve service. However, the redesigns are to come with zero cost increases. The $13 million that would fund the toll rebate should instead go to pay for more robust bus or commuter rail or subway service to make transit more attractive. Funding a toll rebate encourages people to drive into the city at a time when we're trying to reduce that mode. There is no real clarity on whether the board has a role to play here, as the legislation says that the CPRB shall approve the use of the outer borough transit funds. However, CPRB hasn't been formally appointed and therefore cannot undertake this important review, so where it goes after this vote is unknown. As Ms. Vanderpool said, the MTA is in the business of providing transit service, not providing driver rebates. In closing, there must be attractive alternatives to driving. Anything less is unacceptable and detrimental to the success of congestion pricing. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tremel Thompson, followed by Alberto Alamo.
You know, it's bad enough we got to come to work and get harassed and beat up by the passengers, but what happens when this happens, when management does this? This is about Assistant Chief Transportation Officer Charles Henschke specifically. In 2016, he came and put up a bulletin, wrote up his own bulletin saying that employees can't charge or use their electronic devices in the lunchroom and lunch area. In 2017, he came and put up employee incident reports and saying learn from others. That didn't come down until I got it in the Daily News. This current contract, you guys claim that there's no light duty positions for women. In fact, y'all got committees on committees on committees to try to figure out light duty work for women and on his job. Can someone explain to me how Mr. Henschke's brother got a light duty position at 130 Livingston Street? How does that happen without nepotism being involved? He can't even pick these jobs, these office jobs, if he wanted to. Any pregnant woman would love to have that office job instead of climbing over third rails, climbing on top of trains, operating a bus so they belly won't be hitting the steering wheel or pulling 40-pound garbage bags. Earlier this year, Mr. Henschke targeted me, and he was bragging that he was able to write me up. It got thrown out because by rule it wasn't my fault. But ironically, 25 days later, he tried to get me to change my statement on the G2. He sent the TSS to do that via another superintendent. And just recently, he claimed that I was tweeting on my train. Why would I do that when most of the bosses here follow my Twitter? It shows that he's targeting me. And when you target me and affect me personally, you affect this guy right here. This is my son. And once you campaign to target me, obviously and eventually you will get elected. And maybe the MTA need to change the name to the ISM because you guys got all the isms. Cronyism, nepotism.
Please
sexism.
kindly conclude your remarks. Thank you. Our next speaker is Alberto Alamo, followed by Rachel Faust.
Good morning to all of you out here, especially Mr. Accord for your involvement in safety. I have a few things to mention here. This picture here is a picture of a tunnel at 205th Street on the Delta line. As you can see, the concrete is falling. You can see those rods. That doesn't look safe. This picture here is right off the Manhattan Bridge on the Q line going northbound. Again, concrete is falling down. That doesn't look safe. Same thing over here, Q line, Manhattan side this time, Canal Street. Concrete falling down. Again, not safe. Beloved L line, here you go too. 14th Street, Union Square to 6th Avenue. Rotted support beams and pillars. So all that, I'm a work train operator, and these are some of our diesels. I could put my foot through that rusted hole. Now, with the weather being as cold as it's going to get tonight, do you think that's going to be a warm place to be? I don't think so. The crack that you see there is one of the doors to our cabs. Now, if I'm in the L-line tube and I have all that silica dust, even with a respirator, all that's coming into my cab, isn't it? So how am I protected? How is that safe? So all this I say, please care more about safety, because we're actually getting tired of this. You care more about the passengers? I don't think so, because they're exposed to the same things we are. So what makes it any different? You say you have no money to fix that, but $500,000 could fix the locomotive. Not $650,000 that you spent on this flat car. That's one. It's a piece of non-motorized equipment. For the price of this car, you can get 2 Lamborghini Diablos with a V12 engine. Does anybody see a rationale here? We're talking about spending wisely, not spending silly. So again, take safety into account, or else we will.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Faust, followed by Jason Pinero.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Foss. I'm the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including state authorities like the MTA. First, we'd like to thank Commissioner Vanderpool for her independent and thoughtful service. We continue to oppose the expansion of the MTA police force. We ask the MTA board to reject this unaffordable and unnecessary expenditure. We have still not seen facts or a coherent rationale to support using scarce transit dollars for more police, and are very concerned about the long-term budget implications, which will likely force future service cuts. Again, major felony numbers from New York City Transit show fewer crimes being committed in 2019, and according to independent research from the Brennan Center released yesterday, misdemeanors are also down. We are also concerned about the workforce implications of expanding the police, and ask that the MTA board carefully examine overtime and employee availabilities issues for MTA police officers specifically. The overtime analysis the MTA paid for that was released in August by Morrison Forster neglected to review overtime issues related to MTA police, stating it was functionally too different from other agencies. However, with a 500-person expansion, nearly doubling the size of the police force, this becomes a very significant issue. As fiduciaries of the MTA, you should be concerned about the use of scarce transit dollars, given the MTA's estimated $426 million deficit by 2023, which assumes optimistic savings from the reorganization plan. We'd also like to follow up on a letter we sent you last week with Citizens Budget Commission, Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, Riders Alliance, Transit Center, and Tri-State Transportation Campaign, opposing mandatory debarment, calling it bad policy. We asked the MTA board to revise the emergency regs to no longer require mandatory debarment, but institute a fair process that affords staff the discretion to consider the circumstances of each project and the pool of vendors available to perform the work. And lastly, on the forensic audit, we support advanced public review of the capital plan and the 20-year needs assessment, but we do not support a new governing body to approve the 20-year needs assessment. We don't need more bureaucracy and politicization of this process. We need an independent process for these numbers to be released to the public.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Pinero, followed by Valerie Joseph.
My dear moderator, you didn't tell how many public speakers are today. That's an epic fail. Because at the beginning of every meeting, you should say how many public speakers are speaking for the record. I'm here today, very disgraceful, at Patrick Joseph Foy, that last month he did an action that makes me throw fumes, confirming Anthony McCord behind closed doors. Guess what, Pat? You don't do things behind closed doors. You do things in front of the public for the record. That's why we demand transparency. And transparency is that I want. And soon enough, I'm going to be pursuing a career. And very soon, I'm going to be grilling you guys all the time up to my toes. Because the public needs information. The public needs transparency. The MTA is not money thrown away like Mr. X referred. We need accountability. We need to be stable. And we need people that are in a set of diversity. We don't need only male folks in the minority. What? Where's the minority? Where are Puerto Ricans? Where's women? I know, Veronica, I'm going to miss you so much, and I wish you luck in Delaware, and I promise you that I'm going to visit you over there to see how things are in Delaware. So that's all that I have for this month.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Valerie Joseph, followed by H.P. Schroer.
Good morning, Board. My name is Valerie Joseph. I'm the accessory advocate for Brooklyn Center for the Independence of the Disabled. But today I'm not here for myself. I'm here for a volunteer in our office. His name is Victor Santana. Good morning, Board. My name is Victor Santana. I am one of the 1,200 people to be on the pilot program. When I first heard about the pilot program, I thought to myself, what a great idea. Now I can travel anytime I want with no restrictions, not to worry about anything. I need to make my rides 1 or 2 days in advance. I don't have to do that anymore. Now I hear that the MTA is making changes to the pilot program after working so well. I find it unfair because I live on a budget, and now with those changes coming to the new year, it's not going to be affordable anymore. I find it unfair that we have to put on a $15 minimum ride cap, 16 rides per month. I wonder if you would do that like every other New Yorker. I don't think so. I live in New York City. Putting restrictions on where they can go and how many times they can use the on-demand rides is not acceptable. This is a great program. Please do not make any changes to the program, or if you're going to hurt this program. I deserve to go where I want without any restrictions. Thank you for taking the time to listen.
Thank you. Our next speaker is H.P. Schroer, followed by Colin Wright.
Good morning. I'm H.P., a veteran of World War II and director of UMIWI. We represent 12,000 veterans attending college in New York City. When we first proposed to the board to establish a veterans discount, we were told you don't have the money. So our mission became to find the money by working with city and state legislators. New York City recognized the moral obligation to veterans and established the veterans discount for the first time in 100 years for those attending college in New York City. At the state level, 2 bills giving all veterans a 50% discount sat for 4 years without gaining any traction. They were rewritten and now supported by a majority of senators and assembly members from both parties. Yet the bills are not being put up for a vote. Why? Because it will cost too much money. When asked what is too much money, there was no response. The truth is, by dedicating the equivalent of 2 cents from every fare collected it will provide enough money. Pat, I want to thank you for recognizing a veteran's service and sacrifice for country is worth 2 cents, and for agreeing to establish the discount once the bills are passed and funded. So I asked Robert Mujica and Larry Schwartz and others concerned to meet with Pap and I to discuss the merits of a discount. The public and state legislators agree there should be one, to include in the governor's budget of $175 billion, the equivalent of 2 cents, as recognition of those who have served and sacrificed for our country is not asking too much, I think.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Colin Wright, followed by Janice Bartley.
Good morning. I'm Colin Wright with Transit Center. Everyone in this room knows that transit riders' #1 priority is to quickly and reliably get where they need to go. But by hiring 500 new MTA police officers, Governor Cuomo and this board are diverting money that's desperately needed to operate the system. We know that there are better ways to spend $250 million to improve subway and bus service. One area of urgent need, for example, is elevator and escalator reliability. Before I get into specifics, I want to acknowledge the commitment to accessibility in the new capital plan. Replacing several dozen elevators and escalators will increase reliability, as will the agency's new maintenance hires. But elevator and escalator reliability still falls far short of your own goals and is nowhere near where riders need it to be. According to agency data, escalator availability is a full 7 percentage points below your own goal. Half of your escalators will fail at least twice a week, and half of your elevators fail at least once every other week. For people with disabilities and older New Yorkers who regularly use the system, this means routinely encountering outages that force time-consuming detours. We know better elevator reliability is possible. Boston maintains nearly 99% elevator availability because it's dedicated the necessary staff and resources to maintain its assets. We ask this board to please reconsider spending $250 million on transit police officers and instead use that money to provide the fundamentals of good transit service for all New Yorkers. And finally, I'd like to congratulate Veronica on your new position and to say thank you for your service. We hope Mayor de Blasio honors your commitment to riders with disabilities and riders in particular by nominating a diverse candidate with a disability to fill your seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Janice Bartley, followed by Chad DeRoche.
Hi, my name is Janos Martin, and I'm a civil rights advocate and attorney and candidate. Sorry? Okay, I'll continue. My name is Janos Martin. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm speaking today to oppose the addition of 500 police officers to the New York City subway system. The New York City subway system is the lifeblood of the city, but it does not exist in a vacuum. We are already living in a city where tensions with the police and the community are very high in certain neighborhoods, as been evidenced by certain recent incidents that happened in the New York City subway system. The communities that I've worked with in my career, low-income communities of color, are very skeptical of this plan to add 500 police to the subway system. So what we did is we went into the subway system to ask riders of all backgrounds whether they agreed with the idea of doing so. What we found is that when we asked more than 200 riders, over 90% of them said that the money that would be spent on police officers would be better spent on improving subway service. That includes track repair work, supporting workers, adding station agents to be the eyes and ears of subway platforms if safety is the primary concern, and those would be better uses of the money that we're spending. My colleague Christina Gonzalez is going to be up in a few minutes, and she's going to walk through the details of how we conducted this survey and what else it revealed. But what was striking to me is that even people who support police in the subway and say they feel more safe when police are there do not think this is how the city and state should be prioritizing their resources. So I would urge this board as we move forward to think about the more than 40% of subway riders who feel less safe when there are police on the platform, the 91% of subway riders who would rather this money be spent on something else, and just recognize that we have an opportunity to think more creatively as a city and as a state about public safety, and that police and jails and prisons are not always the answer to improving public safety. So I'd like to conclude by noting that as Manhattan District Attorney in 2021, I'm going to make sure that we stop stop funding this program, which has been supported by Cy Vance. And so if you are going to move forward with this program, please plan accordingly because that money will not be available in the long term. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Chad DeRoche, followed by Sasha Blair Goldenson. Apologies. Janice Bartley.
Hello, my name is Janice Bartley, and I am back again with concerns about Access a Ride. This past Sunday, I booked my ride to church online. Like any other week, I had a 9:59 a.m. pickup. They got there on time and I was feeling good. Then we got to an unfamiliar location. I realized the driver had the wrong destination. We were at 1257 Colgate Avenue instead of 1257 College Avenue. The driver confirmed the address with me and was willing to take me to the right destination, so we proceeded to go to my church, which wasn't too far from there. I thought that it wasn't going to be a problem because it's something drivers have helped me with before. To my surprise, the dispatcher called and told the driver that because my trip was booked online, he had to take me back to the wrong drop-off destination. I begged the driver to please let me off where we were instead of going back to the wrong destination. He didn't make me go back to an unfamiliar location, but I found myself out in the cold and had to figure out how to get the rest of the way to church myself. I felt the dispatcher had no consideration for my well-being. When you have to depend on a wheelchair as your legs, it is challenging and stressful. Sunday was more of an adventure for me than I wanted. Then yesterday I toured the Accessible Station Lab at J Street and was really excited to see what you're doing to make the subways more accessible. There are amazing things happening there for people who can use them, but please keep in mind those of us who depend on Access a Ride, and please make it work for those of us who need it to get from point A to point B. Thank you and happy holidays.
Thank you. This is just a reminder for all speakers. You must be signed in. We want to be fair to all people that came early. No, I'm not speaking in terms of her. I'm speaking about the gentleman that spoke before, Janice. So please, you must be signed in if you would like to speak in our public session. Our next speaker is Chad DeRoche, followed by Sasha Blair Goldenson.
Okay. Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Chad from Brooklyn. I know New Yorkers will be safe and concerned with elevators and ramps because people need more support doing that in New York City. Come on, have more concern about that too. You know, more about accessory. Every time they always come late more often sometimes. How you can move more, improve that for accessory more for everyone who use it a lot. Come on, do this more properly and safe for everyone who use more accessory. Come on, everybody. Do that for everyone who needs it a lot more. More safety, more elevators, and people who have more disability using wheelchairs or cane or more things people have more concern for themselves to do. Come on, do that better for everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sasha Blair Goldenson, followed by Sarah Walker.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Sasha Blair Goldenson from the Rise and Resist Elevator Action Group. Elevators are for everyone. I'm here today actually not to speak directly about elevators and ramps like Chad just did, because we need them, but about diversity on the board, because there ain't much of it. And if you look over on this side of the room, the place where all the advocates are, like me, every single month, and are always showing up and telling what the problem is, what the problems are that we have, there's plenty of people with disabilities, plenty of people of color, plenty of women, and a lot of transit riders, all categories which I don't see much of on the board. I want to do something a little unconventional here, which is to say, I'd like to have a show of hands just so we can quantify this. Of the people who are on the board, how many identify as women or people of color or people with disabilities? And how many took the subway here today? You all took the subway here. So who took the subway here today? Good. What about on this side of the room? Took the subway, women, people with disabilities. We need more of that on the board. And by my count, there are 5 women going to be on the board after Ms. Vanderpool steps down, and thank you for your wonderful service and representation. We need more of that. And I talked to Mayor de Blasio because he is not usually the one we talk about, since we all know the governor actually runs this show. But the mayor has a really important lever, which is he nominates 4 people for the board. And I asked him to do it on the radio last Friday.
Thank you.
He said
Please
he has
kindly
hope.
conclude your
But hope
remarks.
is not a strategy, Mayor de Blasio. You can change the conversation. You can
Please
get
kindly
people from
conclude
this
your
side of the
remarks.
room,
Thank you.
which is the women, the people of color, and people with disabilities that are none visible ones on the board
Please
right now.
kindly conclude your remarks. Thank
Let's
you.
do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sarah Walker, followed by Miriam Fisher.
This decision to hire 500 new cops is a solution in search of a problem. Depending on which government official you ask, the new cops will be helping the homeless, protecting transit workers, or deterring fare evasion. Are cops really a cure-all for all these different issues? It's hard to square that expectation with the reality of what cops actually do. In just the past few months, we've seen them arrest churro sellers and harass people for sleeping and hanging art. We've seen them attack groups of black teenagers, punching them in the face. In October, 10 cops held a black man at gunpoint for the crime of beating the $2.75 fare, putting his life and the lives of other subway riders at risk. The policing of the subway is undeniably also about serving the interests of wealthy gentrifiers who wish the homeless to be unseen, who flinch at the sight of the problems they themselves have created. It is a call not for the homeless to be invisible, but a call for their extermination. It is a war on poverty. I ask you, does this violence and racism make the subway safer? Does it help the trains run on time? Does it fix the infrastructure? Does it clean the cars? Does it boost ridership? Does it improve accessibility for disabled folks? Does it make the subway affordable for low-income people? Because these are just some of the real problems that the MTA could be addressing with the $250 million. The reality is that for people of color, poor people, and homeless people, more cops mean heightened danger using the subway. Adding more cops guarantees that there will be more harassment, more assaults, and everywhere the threat of violence. If this board is sincerely concerned for public safety, do not hire any more cops and fire the ones that are already there. No cops, no fares.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Miriam Fisher, followed by Janos Martin.
Miriam Fisher, I want to confirm some of my colleagues and testimony on no cops on the subway, and that some of the money is the same stream funds for operating costs that would enhance maintenance of elevators and escalators and possibly other needs for people with disabilities. I want to also talk about the issue of diversity on the board, and I want to give my own personal testimony of some of my struggles as somebody with an invisible disability who was hit by a car, had 2 back operations, and was seeing my back surgeon a few weeks ago getting off at 53rd and 5th Avenue. A subway, which I think is a key station near MoMA, near the library, near St. Patrick's. There are 2 escalators there. They only go up during rush hour, and since it's a packed station, rush hour apparently is 5 to 10 in the morning. It's a very steep station. maybe 3.5 to 4 stairs. I went to my back surgeon, and on my way home, which was before 10, I couldn't go down. The escalators only go up. I spoke to the clerk. She said there have been many complaints about this. I was told to write to the MTA. I think I did in October, November, December. I don't expect to get an answer. These are some of the clueless insensitivity decisions of people who are not disabled and don't understand the needs of people with disabilities on the subway. Often there are no seats. I often take the they took out seats to speed it up, which I don't think has been successful. There could be folding seats that would accommodate more people.
Thank you so much.
Seats. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Anna Miliak, followed by Christina Gonzalez.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna. I'm here with the Mayday Student Organization, and I'm here today to read a portion of an open letter initiated by the MDSO on the accessibility struggle. We take up the challenge thrown down by the MTA when it announced plans to ration the number of rides subsidized by the on-demand pilot program to 16 rides per month, capped at $15 per ride. A similar initiative in Chicago subsidizes $27 trips with 8 trips per day, making the MTA's program nothing but an insult to the disabled people it claims to serve. Programs like the eHail paratransit program and Accessoride, which are inadequate to begin with, support the ability of many disabled people to hold jobs, go to medical appointments, and visit friends and family. Cuts to these programs are a virtual sentence to social death, isolation, and confinement for many. Less than a quarter of subway stations are wheelchair accessible, leaving the MTA in blatant violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Among this already low number, many elevators are frequently out of service, filthy, or only provide access to trains going in one direction. This leaves many gaps in service, which the on-demand program takes a modest but incomplete step towards closing. Any reduction of service or added costs could leave many who rely on the program without a job and virtual prisoners in their own city. We demand freedom from the constraints imposed on the disabled, not by their bodies, but by the inadequate conditions the MTA offers them. The state's continued failure to enforce the ADA demonstrates that it is unfit to rule and incompetent to assure an adequate existence to the disabled. The Board of Trustees have said your bodies are not compatible with the transit system, but it is in fact the board and their inadequate transit system that is not compatible with society. We demand a world where disabled people are treated as equal members of society and benefit from social wealth as such. We demand a world where the disabled are permitted to live and not just survive, a world where common satisfaction of needs, not profit, is the order of the day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christina Gonzalez, followed by Omar Vera.
Hi, good morning. My name is Christina Gonzalez. I'm an activist and organizer here in New York City. A few weeks ago, our mayor said that if you asked 100 people if they wanted more police officers on the subway, 75 of them would say yes. So as an organizer, I said, bet. Obviously, I recognize my own bias. I recognize that I live in a bubble. So we grabbed our clipboards. We organized with Janos Martin in Manhattan and Jessica Gonzalez Rojas in Queens and asked our neighbors how they really felt about the addition of cops. While 49% of them in Manhattan said that they did want more police officers on the subway, and 79% of them in Queens said that they wanted more police officers on the subway. We also asked them if they felt more safe or less safe with the presence of police officers. It was split about half and half in Manhattan, and most people in Queens said that they felt safer with more police officers. The thing that I want to point out is that obviously of the people that felt less safe, 88% of them were people of color, 54% of those people are black people, and these are the people that we need to be listening to. The other piece that I really want to point out is the third question that we asked folks, that even in Queens, where a majority of the people were in favor of having more police officers, they felt safer with the presence of police officers, 90% of those people said that if you were to spend $120 million a year on better services or more police officers, 90% of them said better service. Those were the same results that we also received in Manhattan, and I urge you today to vote against hiring 500 additional state police officers and spending your money on many of these better ideas that people are presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Omar Vera, followed by Cassandra Rafucci.
Good morning, MTA board. Welcome to the December edition of your full board meeting. First, I'd like to congratulate Veronica on her new job, leading the Delaware Transit. I'm not sure the name, but she's going to do great. She did great here the past three and a half years. And I remember when she was here, the day the W was restored by vote. Thanks, Andrew. She was the first speaker here, and I was number 3. And thankfully she was confirmed the following month. That month, I remember it all through May, June of 16, very clearly. So yes, that's that. Second, like I told Chairman Foy and the rest on Monday, I had to apologize. I'm deeply sorry for what I said the previous month, when I was just at my peak. I was furious over what happened. The transit night, last night, the previous night's delay when commuting home from Macy's. But like I said, and I also personally apologize to Sarah Feinberg. You should be one day you should be the transportation secretary. You do a heck of a lot better than Elaine Chao. Just so you know. So don't worry about that. Next, I'd like to also discuss within the next half minute or so. Let's all improve service. We need more accessibility. Andy, I know you're going to do this. You have it. The ball's in your court. Also, I'd like to also mention Monday when I talked about the 1980s B&D services. I found the map on the library, but I need to go to eBay to get it. But last but not least, have a happy holidays, happy New Year as well, and thank you all for all your hard work and doing.
Thank you.
I'll see you all in January. Depends on my schedule and stuff, but
Thank you
I'll be
so
sure to make
much.
room.
Please
Thanks.
kindly conclude. Our next speaker is Cassandra Rafucci, followed by Colin Ashley.
Good morning, Chairman Foy and board members. My name is Cassandra Rafucci, and I'm a private citizen of Coney Island, Brooklyn. As you all know, the last stop on N trains is 86th Street, Gravesend, and Kings Highway is the stop which has been designated for crew change conductors. When waiting for conductors to come down, they leave the doors open when it's closed. When it's cold outside, I feel they should close them to keep the heat inside the train so the passengers feel comfortable. Also, I feel the conductor should be waiting for the next arriving N train at Kings Highway so passengers don't have to wait 20 minutes till the next conductor comes down. What if an emergency occurs? Then who do we riders report it to? There's no emergency call on the platform. We will have to walk all the way to the front of the train to the operator or go upstairs, which is at the back of the platform, to the agent at the booth. So please take these matters into consideration. Thank you very much and have a happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Colin Ashley, followed by Suzanne Cinnamon.
Good morning. My name is Colin Ashley. I'm a sociology professor at Hunter College and an activist and organizer with People's Power Assemblies. I'm speaking again today on the proposed financial plan and specifically Cuomo's racist decision to add 500 more cops to the subways. It is known that the MTA is ridiculously in debt. Board member Lynn has actually enumerated multiple concerns that make this proposed budget and financial plan untenable. For his concerns alone, the board should vote no. I encourage you all to actually think about putting pressure on the city and state to demand the bailout of the MTA as a public good so that we can do some real work of advancing our society and making the subway free and fully accessible. Billions of dollars in debt service going to Wall Street on the backs of poor New Yorkers, the disabled, and people of color is unacceptable. It is also clear, as Board Member Vanderpool has pointed out on several occasions, that your own research methodology on quantifying fare evasion is flawed and apparently constantly changing. And adding a new variable of hundreds of cops with the risk and threat they pose will actually tell you nothing about your supposed intervention. But it's that actual risk and threat to life of the additional cops I want to again reemphasize today. Many of you have even acknowledged the historic and continual racial disparities of policing in the city. But we can't simply discuss this issue with numbers and stats that have actually long proven the racial disparities in policing. For myself and other black folks, when we saw the way a dozen cops ran into a subway car and pointed their guns at 19-year-old Adrian Napier, we were reminded qualitatively of how little black life is valued in the city, in this country. Signing off on this financial plan to deploy 500 more NYPD foot soldiers is you all also refusing to value black life and actually treating it as a necessary sacrifice to appease Cuomo, who
Thank
will
you
throw
so
you
much.
all under the bus.
Please kindly
It's
conclude.
broken windows policing, it's racist, full service, full access, no cops, no fares.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Suzanne Cinnamon, followed by Eben Kirksey.
The so-called fare beaters are an obvious scapegoat for the MTA's debt. The city's proposal to hire and train 500 cops rather than allocate those same funds to building a truly accessible system and abolishing the fare is absurd. We begin to see the motives behind this non-solution only upon acknowledging New York City's abusive relationship with the homeless. We've spent decades ignoring those most in need rather than using our time and resources to address this crisis. Our unwillingness to empathize with these vulnerable populations enables the criminalization of poverty, a trend that both feeds into and is informed by privileged commuters' disgust with the poor. This anti-homeless sentiment sanctions police presence in the MTA and their surveillance of a wider and wider range of our lives. Each of us knows the cops are racist and that brutality describes not extreme incidents but police business as usual. We don't need cops. We need to dismantle the capitalist status quo that's turned housing, a fundamental need, into a private market and is in the process of doing the same to the MTA. It's always striking to hear pre-recorded MTA announcements referring to individuals using their system as customers rather than passengers. Advancing that line of reasoning, the NYPD treats any person perceived as a non-citizen or non-participant in capitalist production, in other words, the homeless, black and brown people, as illegitimate and disposable. We must do everything in our power to subvert this. To borrow a phrase of yours, together we can make a better system. Members of the board, whose side are you on? None of this should be a debate. Requesting your vote against the inhumane treatment of the poor, black and brown in New York City is undignified. But here we are. Don't forget, New York has enough homes to house everyone, and all cops are bastards.
Our next speaker is Eben Kirksey, followed by Peter Savalos.
I'm a professor of anthropology. I live in Brooklyn, and I work at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. When I was a child, my mother taught me a very simple lesson, and that was to share. I invite you to imagine a utopian future. I invite you to imagine free public transportation for everyone in New York City. That dream is attainable. That dream is within the realm of political and economic possibility. You could make that dream happen. Or you could vote to militarize the subway. You could continue targeting black and brown people. You could continue making the disabled community have a very challenging daily life. Or you could work towards this utopian dream. How do you want to be remembered? Thank you.
Our next speaker is Elias Benson, followed by Jessica Murray.
Hi, good morning. My name is Elias, and I'm with the May Day Student Organization, which organizes students around a program for the revolutionary transformation of higher education and is working to unite the student movement with popular struggles against exploitation and oppression. Today, when most subway stations remain inaccessible in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, conditions continue to deteriorate for workers and riders, and already inadequate programs like Access-a-Ride are being capped or at roughly one ride every other day. It is crucial to remember how many people with disabilities won many of the fundamental rights they enjoy today. In April of 1977, around 150 disabled folks stormed the Federal Health, Education, and Welfare Building in San Francisco, an action that was coordinated as part of a 10-day sit-in around the country, and that enjoyed the support of groups including the Black Panther Party and groups fighting for gay liberation. For 28 days, the militants held the building as the Oakland chapter of the Black Panther Party broke through the police blockade to bring food to the occupiers every day. For their efforts, the militants won concessions in the form of regulations that called for measures to make public transportation more accessible. However, in a society organized according to profit as opposed to human need, such concessions are illusory and are offered insincerely, just as the promises made by the exploiters and oppressors are hypocritical and inconsistent. In 1980, the concessions won by what came to be known as the San Francisco 504 occupation were wiped out at the stroke of a pen by a federal judge. Today, the Board of Trustees applauds itself for putting forward a plan that in the best case would only make an additional 14% of stations accessible, leaving the majority of stations without reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. The May Day Student Organization finds this unacceptable. We demand nothing less than full accessibility, along with the abolition of the fare without cuts to labor
Please kindly
or service,
conclude your remarks.
which we aim to help win through popular force.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jessica Murray, followed by Jesse Stone Jackson.
Good morning. I want to call attention to inconsistencies in data that have been presented this year about the Advanced Reservation eHealth program, which ended in March. And I urge you to look more closely at paratransit data before making decisions about trip and subsidy caps. Contrary to claims that on-demand use is going up and up, dashboard data shows that eHealth trips have been flat from May to October of this year, with an average of around 30 trips per month per user. I also found that nearly 60% of the budget increases in the past 2 years are due to carrier service and administrative cost increases. The other 40% are due to eHail and increased demand that has accompanied increased ridership. And you can read my full analysis at bit.ly/AARCOSTS. I understand that there are investments that are driving some budget increases, including the purchase of 700 replacement vehicles, improvements to ride tracking systems, but these costs should be analyzed separately for a fair comparison of service types. There's been virtually no discussion of how on-demand service will save on costs associated with rebooking trips, compensating drivers for missed pickups, processing taxi reimbursements, etc. Improvements to convenience and good service will always increase demand, and drastic reductions to convenience and service will reduce demand. Advocates know that proposed caps to the on-demand program will effectively reduce demand to near zero. Even if utilized to the full extent by all 2,400 passengers in the proposed expansion, the cost per year will be less than $7 million, less than half of this year's spending for on-demand service, but for twice as many people. Giving unrestrained access to paratransit on demand was your decision, and it changed lives for the better. You have the choice to set more reasonable caps or change 1,200 lives for the worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jesse Stone Jackson, followed by Jafari Fox.
Good day. I'm here talking about the budget issue with the addition of 500 additional police officers. That's one thing unacceptable because we're targeting the low-income families and individuals in New York. We've already learned from the U.S. Supreme Court that they refuse to hear cases right now concerning criminalizing homelessness, low-income people, trying to get on their feet. This is based out of Boise, Idaho. Another issue is law enforcement, which has been decreasing more than 11%, which is listed currently online by the Federal Order of Police Union, that it's where are these officers going to come from? We can't keep enough officers for the amount that we're training to go into law enforcement. Another issue is the law enforcement biases. They're using facial recognition software that we learned yesterday was bypassed just using face masks at airports. We're pretty much putting officers in the spot where they don't need to be, blaming that fare violations are the reason that we're having problems when the MTA could spend all the money that they need to do upgrades, fix the system that's already broken. It took me an hour and a half to get down here, and usually it only takes me 35 minutes. That's pretty sad for a transportation system. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jafari Fox, followed by Matthew G.S.
Hello. As a former student of high school and law enforcement and public safety at NYPD Explorer through my high school years, and a violence interrupter for the New York City's mayor's office to prevent gun violence, I am here to propose an alternative for over-policing in the subway. As a violence interrupter, I was trained by the Department of Health and certified in violence prevention. We use our credibility and influence in the community to diminish violence. As of 2018, over 22 sites over the New York City was able to diminish gun violence by 67%. What I propose is a science experiment. Let's have two control groups of NYPD and violence interrupters adopt a subway. Let's assess their work performance in these subways and how efficient they are able to work. We already know that over-policing intimidates black communities. These are also your customers. So by putting more NYPD in the subway, you are discouraging your customers to use the subway. Let's go forward with this experiment and see how efficient alternative violence intervention and prevention can be implemented in the subway. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Matthew G.S.
Good morning. My name is Matthew Giesa. I'm speaking for Civics United for Railroad Environmental Solutions. I wish everyone the joys of this season. Our community's New Year's wish is for the MTA to keep her promise to buy the cleanest, most technologically advanced Tier 4 switcher locomotives for the New York and Atlantic Railway to use. LIRR managers have rigged locomotive procurements and illegally sold off old locomotives to New York and Atlantic Railway. LIRR managers' failures have resulted in 2 active investigations to date, one by the MTA Office of the Inspector General and a more recent one by the New York State Assembly. On November 19th, 2019, Cures made an invited presentation to the Diesel Technology Forum. Cures talked about Waste Management's Tier 4 switcher locomotive. The New York and Atlantic Railway has been operating this locomotive for about a year. The locomotive uses 40% less fuel than the power it replaces. The locomotive has near zero emissions. During the December 11, 2019 presentation to the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, the New York and Atlantic Railway President James Bonner described this locomotive as fantastic. I have seen this locomotive myself in person, and I'm not endorsing anything. However, I must say it is quite a fantastic piece of machinery. I most respectfully ask everyone in this room to think about what LIRR managers have done. They refuse to give comparators a fair shake. LIRR managers have defied NYS legislators who appropriated $21 million since 2013 for this cause. I ask you to consider the damage done to MTA's finances, service, and the quality of air that residents and workers breathe, including myself. I ask the MTA to finally keep your promise in 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Foy, this concludes our public comment.
Lucille, thank you. I want to thank all the public speakers this morning for their candor. All of the issues that have been raised this morning are important to the board and staff and everybody at the MTA. Our customers deserve reliable service, which we're in the process of consistently delivering at New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, and Metro North. Substantial investment in the system, including unprecedented investment in accessibility, which is a fundamental tenet of the 2020 to 24 capital plan. And our customers also deserve to feel safe and secure in the system. At the same time, we need to balance our budget while funding these priorities, which customers, who are also taxpayers, deserve.
Mr. Chairman, we've spent an hour and 15 minutes this morning listening to public speakers.
All right, going on. I want to talk about a very troubling felony assault and hate crime that occurred in the past couple of days. On December 12th, Thursday, 11:40 p.m. at the Wall Street station, there was a felony assault and a hate crime inflicted on an Israeli Jewish woman. The assaulter referred to the murder of two Jewish people in Jersey City that occurred literally 2 days ago before the assault. The victim had a serious gash on her face. The encounter was recorded. Kudos to the New York Police Department Transit Bureau, which immediately responded and made an arrest. There was hateful anti-Semitic rhetoric used as part of the assault, and a statement made that the attacks on two Jersey City residents 2 days before the assault, that should have been extended and continued and made and resulted in more death in Jersey City. Again, kudos to the New York Police Department Transit Bureau. The last few weeks have been eventful. I'm proud to say we're seeing continued improvements in performance as we head into the end of the year and prepare to execute our historic 2020 to 24 capital plan. This year, great work has been done across all our agencies, and we're looking to continue and build on that in 2020. As always, we owe a great deal to our hardworking frontline employees who deliver operational excellence every day. We recognize their dedication and commitment at every agency. I note that we've reached a tentative contract agreement with TWU Local 100 since the last board meeting. We negotiated in good faith over a period of months to deliver a deal that is a win for our customers, the taxpayers, and transit employees. Right now, we're awaiting the outcome of the union's ratification process, assuming and after which the agreement would come before this board for approval next year. This contract, along with the capital plan, will allow us to advance our core mission to keep this region moving. We're continuing to focus on and improve our performance every day. Earlier this week, Andy Byford and Sally Libera announced that subway on-time performance reached 81.8% in November. We've now had 6 straight months with OTP above 80%. That's unheard of in recent years. Running times were faster on every line last month compared to the same time a year ago. Trains are getting through the system more quickly, shaving minutes off many trips. This is great news for our customers, and it's a major credit to the subway's team. On the commuter rails, on-time performance is also trending upwards. For the Long Island Railroad, it reached nearly 91% in October. Metro North did even better, with 94% of trips arriving to their destinations on time. We're all proud of the improvements we've seen on MTA buses. This week, we advanced our commitment to creating a cleaner, greener fleet by rolling out the first of our new all-electric articulated buses. We've also implemented several strategies to improve bus performance that are already paying major dividends, including the opening of the 14th Street busway and automatic bus lane enforcement. A word about Omni. Speaking of progress, we announced a major expansion of the Omni contactless fare payment into Penn Station last week. This design-build technology project remains on time and on budget. Omni's also hit its 4 millionth tap, exceeding all usage projections. At Penn Station, 96 Omni readers went live at 18 turnstile arrays serving the A, the C, and the 1, 2, 3 subway lines. This was a major milestone for us. Penn is obviously one of the busiest transit hubs in North America, with more than 160,000 people per day swiping in using MetroCards. The Omni project remains on track for all subway stations and buses to have Omni in place by the end of 2020. And by 2021, we're expecting to enable Omni for Long Island Railroad and Metro-North customers. Our goal is still to phase out the MetroCard completely by 2023. A word about transformation. We've been making steady progress on transformation. First, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Chief Transformation Officer Anthony McCord, who joins us here today for his first board meeting. Anthony, welcome. The first major initiative of our transformation plan is underway. We've commenced the process of migrating employees from across all agencies who support capital projects and centralizing those under Chief Development Officer Jana Lieber. This is the first step towards the transformation plan recommendation to establish a single organization responsible for the planning, development, and delivery of all capital projects across the MTA. This consolidation also provides a single point of capital project accountability and makes it easier to bundle capital projects into larger packages to optimize value and schedule. And most importantly, the new office centralizes prioritizing and planning to ensure the new capital plan will address the greatest needs. We've previewed the approach with great success on the L train and Long Island Railroad third track. Budget. Transformation will not only fundamentally change the way we plan and deliver infrastructure projects, but also reshape the way we work today to become a more efficient and streamlined organization. But we aren't waiting until transformation is complete to get there. In a little while, the budget and financial plan will be considered by the board at this meeting. Budgets are not just about the fiscal realities we face, but also a statement of priorities for the coming year. We recognize the tough fiscal times ahead, and this plan, through a host of measures, tackles these issues head on. At times, that includes hard choices. The budget we presented in November and are asking you to approve today includes continued commitments to our customers and to transformation and reform. A word about 4 people who are leaving the MTA. I want to take a moment to recognize the hard work and dedication of, first, our friend and colleague, Helene Fromm. Helene has spent much of her career in public service and most of it in the MTA legal department, serving as Deputy General Counsel and Acting General Counsel, leading the MTA team on litigation matters on state and federal matters. Helene also served as Chief of Staff of the New York City Mayor's Office of Operations. Both at the City of New York and later as MTA Bus General Counsel, Helene was integral to the success of an agency that today has annual ridership of well over 100 million. Finally, as MTA Chief of Staff, Helene has handled a number of critical operational issues and worked closely with the MTA board. We thank her and will miss her leadership, professionalism, and kindness. We wish her all the best in her well-earned retirement. I'd also like to recognize Don Spuro, our Deputy Chief Financial Officer. Don started here in 1988 at TBTA, where he served in a variety of planning and financial positions and culminated his career there as president. Among many notable accomplishments, Don oversaw the implementation of open road tolling at the Henry Hudson Bridge, where it was first implemented, and the UL Carey and Queens Midtown tunnels. He has since served in a key leadership role in the development of the MTA's largest and historic 2020 to 24 capital plan, $51.5 billion, as everybody in the room knows. Don has served as a trusted advisor to many of us here at headquarters, including Bob, Foran, Ronnie Hakam, and me. We thank him for all his contributions to the MTA family and congratulate him on his well-deserved retirement. Thank you, Don. I also want to recognize Midori Valdivia, my chief of staff. Midori is moving on from the MTA at the end of the year. Previously, Midori served as Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Administration at the Taxi and Limousine Commission, and before that, we worked together at the Port Authority. Since joining the MTA, Midori has led some of the most important agency priorities, including the successful passage of historic legislation last session involving Central Business District tolling, a first-in-the-nation program that will not only bring environmental improvements for the region, but also deliver funding for unprecedented transit investments. Midori has also served in a key leadership role on transformation and development of the proposed historic 2020 capital plan. More importantly, she served as a thoughtful advisor, always providing a clear perspective and advocating for the best interests of the public and our customers, and been a good friend and mentor to many here, creating a genuine community across a large and diverse agency. Midori, you'll be missed by your MTA family, but we're all wishing you well in your new chapter. Thank you, Midori. Lastly, today will be the last board meeting for Commissioner Vanderpool. Veronica joined the MTA board in 2016, but has long served as a thoughtful and tireless advocate for sound transportation policy on behalf of customers and riders before that. As a board member, Veronica has consistently brought a clear vision and strong understanding of what the core MTA mission is and what makes sense for all our riders, and has always boldly and candidly shared her perspective. Her leadership and insights will be missed both at the MTA and in the region. We wish her well in her new role, and I know she'll do great things in bringing innovation and creativity to the citizens of Delaware. Veronica, thank you. The minutes of the November board meeting have been distributed to all members. Are there any corrections or omissions? Andrew? Neil?
Yeah, my name is spelled Neal, and the Long Island Railroad minutes reflect a misspelling, so in the effort of absolute correctness, I provide this very material correction.
I second that material change. Any other corrections or omissions? If not, do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Second. All in favor? Thanks. Minutes are approved. Next, we have a presentation today on the forensic audit, which we were tasked by the governor and the legislature with completing by the end of the year. We have Bert Nuring and Eric Nyland from Crow, the independent firm that performed the forensic audit, with us today to share their findings. The audit found that the MTA has met all its obligations under state law, and that, quote, the MTA capital planning processes are consistent with industry-leading practices, close quote. But the report does recommend some important changes we can make to ensure we're meeting our internal responsibilities to make our processes more efficient. Bert and Eric.
Thank you, Chairman Foy. Well, with me today is Eric Nyland, and we are going to present a high level of the draft report that has been provided, and assuming that there are no additional corrections or comments, we will be finalizing that report at the end of this week. I'm going to first talk about the objectives of the audit as well as an overview of the audit. As far as the overview of the audit, we performed an independent audit of the MTA's capital planning process. We found that the capital planning process was consistent with industry-leading standards. However, we did have audit findings. The audit findings, though, were related to areas that could be improved in the 20 to 24 plan, and the 2024 plan does not require modifications based on our audit. The areas of the findings are in three general areas. First, cost estimating. Second, asset condition and assessment documentation. And third, modernization of the capital planning systems themselves. We have recommendations around those particular findings, and we believe the recommendations, if followed, will help direct the MTA in the implementation of the 20 to 24 capital plan, as well as provide some efficiencies in that process going forward. We also feel that the recommendations will help improve the capital planning process in the future, in particular with regards to the plan in 2025. The authority for the audit can be found in Public Authorities Law, Section 1279F. And the first paragraph on this page provides the information around the audit. The audit was performed in accordance with general accepted government auditing standards. The second paragraph on this page provides information related to the financial advisory effort that was performed. However, Crow did perform procedures around item D in that particular paragraph as it relates to a review of the 2015 to 2019 plan as it related to cost overages and or duplication. The objectives and conclusions I will cover next, and as development of the audit, we identified 7 objectives that we reviewed. The first being is determining whether the asset conditions were accurately documented, and we found in this particular objective that the MTA met that objective, that we found that asset condition ratings were accurately documented. We did, however, have some exceptions, and that we reported those in finding 4. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Second objective was to determine whether the MTA's condition assessment of the current assets warrants the need for replacement and is based on condition standards provided by the MTA. In this particular objective, we found that the MTA met that objective, that the current asset conditions of the assets did warrant replacement based on the MTA standards. The third objective was to determine whether MTA comprehensive policies and procedures were properly designed and implemented for the preparation of the 5-year plan. We found that those procedures were properly designed and implemented for the preparation of 5-year plan. However, we have made recommendations around providing a comprehensive policies and procedures around the capital planning process, and I will discuss that in a minute as well. Objective 4 then is determine whether the 5-year capital plan complies with applicable laws, rules, regulations, and ordinances, both as designated by the MTA as well as by the state public authorities law. And in this particular objective, we found that the MTA complied in all significant respects with applicable internal policies of the MTA, and we found that the MTA complied with the public authorities law as it related to the capital planning process. Number 5, the objective was to determine whether the capital planning processes are consistent with industry-leading practices, and we used a sample of about 5 different peer organizations as a guide. We found that as I mentioned before, that the capital planning process was consistent with industry-leading practices. However, we do have recommendations for improvement in the capital planning process based on some findings that we noted in interviews of some of the other agencies. Objective 6 related to determining whether the mix of the investments and cost ranges included in the 2024 plan were based on the 20-year needs, conditions, as well as investment strategies. And we found that the 20 to 24 capital plan was based on the 20-year needs, conditions, and investment strategies. We do have some recommendations for improvements, as we noted in a couple findings. And then the 7th objective was to determine whether the cost overages or duplication of projects occurred in the 2015 to 2019 capital plan, and assess whether those cost overages and duplications were evaluated and documented by the MTA. We did identify that there were cost overages and or duplication of projects that occurred in the 2015 to 2019 plan, and we've reported those in finding 1. However, we did find that the MTA did approve those cost overages through its process for determining the approval process of expenditures as related to the capital plan. Our findings I will discuss next, and it's important, we feel, to talk about a little bit about the definitions around the findings. And there are 2 types of areas that we review and report on as it relates to the finding. The first being compliance. And so one of the tests and procedures we perform is to determine that there's compliance with internal MTA policies and procedures, and secondly with the New York State Public Authorities Law. And so as you look at this table from left to right, it goes from least severity to most severity, and the far right being that there would be significant non-compliance with either MTA policies and procedures or public authority law. And so that's the definition behind the compliance aspects that we looked at with regards to our audit procedures. The second area then is controlled deficiencies, and once again going from left to right, we are reviewing the deficiencies as it relates to the design of controls or the implementation of controls, all the way to the far right being that we would feel that there are control deficiencies that are significant that would warrant modifications to the 2024 to 2024 plan. And so that's how we are defining the control deficiencies, and those are the checks and balances that you have around the process of developing a capital plan. So with regards to our findings, this next slide indicates that we did not have any findings that are in that far right-hand category where there was significant non-compliance, or that we have matters that would require modifications to the 20 to 24 capital plan. We did have three findings of non-compliance, and these were non-compliance with practices and procedures found in the MTA's accounting as well as processing of the capital plan. And then we did have three significant deficiencies, and these are significant deficiencies where we feel that the MTA should prioritize the effort to implement our recommendations, as we believe that those will help improve the capital planning process in going forward, as well as improve the implementation of the capital plan for 20 to 24. So I'll talk about the recommendations and the particular findings related to those recommendations. And we have 9 findings and recommendations. The first finding is that the MTA can improve cost estimates with more formal, standardized, and consistently applied cost estimating procedures and agency documentation requirements. And in this particular case, we are recommending that the MTA develop cost estimating guide with method templates, as well as other basis of estimate tools to help provide more documented cost estimates, as well as more information for the evaluation of those particular capital items included in the plan. We also are recommending and understanding that a capital plan over 5 years is going to have to use estimates, but as you get closer to the actual construction, we believe that by implementing a plan for doing a review of those cost estimates on a detailed basis for those construction programs or projects that will be in the first 2 years of the plan will be beneficial to understand the true cost at that point in time, as well as to provide updates to the capital plan to make it a living document on an annual basis. The second finding and recommendations related to MTA costs that exceeded comparative benchmarks. MTA was provided rationale for the various reasons that that is the case. And what we are recommending on a go-forward basis with regards to the 2024 plan is to for the MTA to actively manage that capital program using an annual capital programming cycle, as well as managing the expenditures by planning, contracting, logistical, project management, and communication improvements. We feel that that will help address some of the items that were noted in the 2015 to 2019 5-year plan, as well as to provide potential cost efficiencies in the future. The third finding and recommendation, it relates to asset inventories and condition. And we have 2 findings in this particular category. First being that we feel the MTA can enhance the linkages between the capital planning projects and assets targeted for replacement. So We recommend providing a crosswalk between investment strategies and condition assessment databases to ensure linkages between the 20-year needs and the applicable 5-year plan. Also, to document specific plans at agencies to determine which assets will be addressed with certain allotments. So providing more specifics with regards to the projects as you're getting closer to the implementation of that plan. And third recommendation is relate to developing a form for the development of asset condition assessments, needs replacements, provide more standardization across the footprint of the MTA to help provide for clearer documentation of the capital planning process itself. And then finding number 4, also related to asset inventory and condition, is that the MTA has comprehensive asset condition databases throughout the not only the MTA but also at the agencies. And they reflect existing conditions. However, there should be supplements to that asset condition database to better support the asset condition assessment and determinations. So we're recommending that the MTA implement procedures and systems to ease a very manual process that is currently in place that will help provide more consistent and accurate condition information to establish capital needs. Also, to make certain changes and updates to existing data sets as well as reconciliation of that data. In a very manual process that we found, there were errors from the initial data that remains at the agency up to the various databases. And because of the manual processes, errors can occur. So we feel that automating and enhancing that with systems will help keep the records more sound. Also, making sure that there's a coordination of the channel of communication between maintenance and capital planning programs. So to make sure that there's appropriate condition information relayed to help update the records. Also, refining definitions of state of good repair, normal replacement, as well as system improvements across the agencies will help with regards to more standardization of that process. And finally, in finding number 4, because of the manual process, we believe a succession plan would be important to make sure that employee knowledge is appropriately transferred when people leave and when there's changes in personnel that activity can be carried on without causing a disruption in the capital plan. The last category of findings, and we have 5 findings here, are related to the capital planning process itself. Finding 5 relates to an enterprise asset management system. The MTA is investing in implementing an enterprise-wide asset management system. We think that this is important for the continuation of the capital planning program, as well as to provide more information for decision makers as to what particular program should go into that capital plan. And so we believe that the MTA should continue that implementation as well as to closely monitor the implementation, because we think that hinges the success of future capital planning programs. The 6th finding relates to, once again, the manual process. The MTA is developing a state of good repair decision support tool to enable objective, data-driven, and risk-based project selection. And we are recommending that effort continue and that be completed in the next 2 years. And once again, both of those combined with regards to the enterprise asset management and the state of good repair decision support tool will help provide more data around the improvements that are included within the capital plan itself. Our 7th finding related to capital planning process, finding number 7, relates to the 2024 plan. We feel a periodic reporting and robust reporting of both the dollar value of projects as well as the projects delivered, as well as employing earned value management techniques will help provide for more information to the public about the progress that the MTA is making on the capital plan, as well as providing for standardized key performance indicators will help everyone understand what is going on and what is happening with that capital planning process. Finding 8, we did identify some limitations with regards to the MTA capital planning review and approval process, and we have 3 particular recommendations to improve that capital process. First, we believe that establishing a governing body that is charged with the 20-year needs review and approval process would be important to see the 20-year needs document through the approval and establishment. Also, secondly, removing or revising project nomination cycle to realistically reflect the time necessary to develop capital plans. So providing a little more on the specifics of the projects in order to determine the priority for funding as well as positioning within the capital plan itself. And then we also are recommending providing a draft of the 20-year needs and 5-year plan documents to the board and public 45 days in advance of the planned approval in order to provide for public comment on those plans to help address transparency matters and improve the visibility of the plan to the public. And then our 9th finding related to the process, while we found that there are policies and procedures in place, there are not comprehensive policies and procedures in place for the development of the 5-year capital plan and the 20-year needs process. And we believe that providing that type of documentation will not only help the MTA as well as the agencies provide a more thorough as well as improved capital planning process and provide more information as succession of employees are necessary to review that capital plan. So thank you for your attention, and open up for questions.
Bert and Eric, thank you. Questions, comments from the board? Commissioner Lynn.
Hi, thank you very much. When we spoke by phone last week, you recall I asked, suppose these 9 findings, and I counted the recommendations, 24 recommendations, had been known to everybody before we did the newest capital plan. What would be the impact of that being in place? And I think in response you pointed really specifically to your findings 1 and 2 about costs and your recommendation 4 about managing expenditures with range of planning, contracting, logistics, project management, communication improvements. And we heard earlier today about Jano's idea of consolidating and bundling and sequencing projects in order to gain more efficiencies. And you also mentioned your finding 8, which you just spoke about, which is limitations on the planning and review process, and you specifically pointed to the 45-day notice process. So looking at those specific findings and recommendations, what would the impact be if we had the knowledge now that you've now brought to us when we were putting together the financial plan, the capital plan?
So I'll start. I think the scope of our review wasn't to identify what the impact would be from a financial standpoint, but I think from a standpoint of providing more transparency around the process itself, provide more input from the board and the public into the particular assets as well as the projects that are going into that plan will help inform and provide more visibility to what is being addressed. We think on a go-forward basis, looking at the management of the plan is where you could really provide more impact as a plan is just that. It's a forward-looking 5-year plan, but I think managing that on an annual basis, reviewing the cost, getting more refinement to the particular cost estimates that you're utilizing will help then inform efficiencies that you might find and being able to reprioritize particular projects based on efficiencies that you might find in eliminating some duplication of effort, for instance.
Follow up on that for a second. The number that we came up with $51+ billion, Clearly, that might have been impacted if we had those cost procedures and recommendations in place. Might they not have?
Well, it's hard to, like I said, it's hard to quantify what that could be, and you know, the costs are based on estimates at this particular point in time, and they're always going to be looking out 5 years. It's going to be hard to identify what those, you know, whether that number should be higher or lower at this particular point in time. From our audit, we found that there were estimates used to generate the plan. Those estimates were in line with what we generally see in the industry, as well as where there were some areas that seemed a little high. We were able to find evidence through looking at peer organizations as well as other information that's publicly available, say that the cost estimates were within range.
So let me leave that for a second. As to the selection of assets for work and what the capital project would look at, I believe we discussed, and wouldn't it make sense that if there was this longer period of time for input and discussion, some of those might have been different?
That certainly could be possible.
Sorry, anybody else? Commissioner Vanderpool.
A comment and a question. So the recommendation in finding 8 about providing 45 days public notice strikes a particular chord for me. It's an issue that has permeated my 3.5 years on the board. And hopefully having a third external party validate the concerns and the frustration that many board members and members of the public and advocates have expressed over 3.5 years will perhaps turn the tide. It seems that maybe we needed an external person to say to us that 2 days time to review a capital program amendment, as was the case in 2017, is woefully inefficient. So I'm very glad to see that particular recommendation. My question is, we do have an enterprise asset management process underway. You've noted this. Where are we with the timeline of that process? Again, that's been underway. It's not a new recommendation. It's an effort that has been spearheaded by Ms. Mildred Chua, in fact.
Anthony McCord, transformation. So we're incorporating many of the components of the EAM into the transformation. There are some tools that are very important and useful in the context of what we want to achieve in transformation. And I can develop that. This is now my 6th day. But one of the first things I identified when I looked across the organization, what are some of the work that's already been achieved? EAM is a very good example of the things that we could leverage. On one hand, to reduce costs, so we're not going to external consultants or folks like that, and also to recognize the work that's already been achieved internally.
I would assume that you would give that answer. I'm asking for a little bit more specificity, just because, again, this has been underway for a little bit of time. Perhaps just a projected timeline for when the board might begin to see some of the outcomes, findings, next steps from that. Is that 3 months? Is that 6 months? What is the anticipated timeline?
Yeah, I would actually like to refer back to Mildred, who knows it far better than I do. But clearly I want to report regularly and clearly to the board, so the board knows what we're doing. And the tools that it allows us to so I'll restate that. The tools that we use and how we use them and the benefits for riders and for the MTA would be a part of that. Mildred, I don't know if you want to provide any detail.
Yeah, hi. We have
taken the enterprise asset management implementation, which was currently on a 5-year timeline, and now are recasting it into a 2-year timeline to look at the critical aspects that need to be in place, the foundation to help the next capital planning process for 2025 to 29. An example would be the asset inventory and the implementation of the actual work order management system, so that you'll have every asset class in the system ready, and the data ready for the planning process to commence in 2022, 2023 would then be available. We are piloting what we call a capital planning tool, wherein we're taking the current data that we have for the 15 to 19 program and understanding how we would want to continue to maintain that data and update it, so that we would be able to layer an investment planning decision support tool that would run investment planning scenarios. And I'm working with that with Capital Program Management. Steve Barang has a current state of good repair database, and you're using that data to begin building a tool, so that we're ready when the data is built in a couple of years and the system is built. Then we'll be able to layer the tools. It's sort of a simultaneous implementation, like an agile approach. Thank you.
Yes, hi. Well, hi. One of the recommendations I noticed was a change in the MTA's way that they use state of good repair. You said you wanted to make it more standardized. Is the current state of good repair too conservative, not conservative enough? I mean, obviously a subway car has a different life than a commuter rail car, which has a different life than a bus. So standardization has its problems too.
I'll fight it. So I think the spirit of that recommendation relates more to the characterization of SGR versus SI. And so the agencies kind of misinterpret one for the other, and to get uniformity in the application of that as the projects are progressing through the cycle.
So it's the way the agencies consider
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct.
And one last question on the 20-year needs assessment. When will we actually get to see that? When will the public get to comment on it?
I think this has been discussed at some length. The 20-year needs assessment data was utilized, I think, by Crow in validating the condition assessments that underlay the capital planning process that went into the new proposed capital plan, which the board has adopted. The consensus was that the document, because it was prepared without the benefit of some of the strategic thinking that went into fast forward, Long Island Railroad forward, way ahead, and so on, that it was not a strategic document, and that consistent if we're honest with ourselves with some historic processes, it was a little bit more of a laundry list based on condition assessments, which we are now hearing from Crow and others need to be upgraded in order to make them more focused and more meaningful and more strategic. So the point is, I think that we're glad that Crow utilized and found the data that was in it useful to validate the substance of what was in the capital program, but it doesn't seem like a document that we want to use because it didn't have the benefit of the strategic thinking that came out of not just Fast Forward and the railroad's plans, but all of the public debate about what we needed to have in the next program. I mean, that which landed us squarely on more money, significantly more money for state of good repair, a huge upgrade and emphasis on ADA accessibility, re-signaling the subway stations, and some of the other major investments that the railroads have been included in the railroads capital program. So that's why I think our view is the 20-year needs assessment. We want to focus on how we can reconfigure it so it's a future-going useful document.
So if you're not going to use that as the operational document, what would be?
Well, we will going forward, because they've given us a plan and a roadmap of how to create a 20-year needs assessment document that is strategic and that does reflect a much more sophisticated condition assessment. I mean, what we're hearing is that the history of for example, of rating different assets is while it's useful and it's been well adhered to, is not. It could be a lot more useful if we then had analyses that went to the criticality of those assets and a lot of other data, potential impacts on ridership, on performance. That's what EAM and this new approach to the condition assessment and the 20-year needs analysis is pointing to, and we're going to use all of it because it is all state-of-the-art type thinking.
And how often will the board be briefed on that?
I think what the legislature has said. I mean, we can the briefing schedule. I defer to the chair and to the board to figure that out. But clearly, we're on the clock now to produce a first-class 20-year needs assessment document in the next couple of years, and the board and the chair should, decide how frequently and in what ways the board wants to be briefed on what we're doing to adopt the recommendations that Crow has given us.
Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Miles.
Yeah, are there federal strictures on enterprise asset management reporting? Is there a federal model we're trying to fit into?
Not necessarily. I mean, there's asset management requirements in the TAM reporting that is done federally, and so you don't necessarily need an enterprise asset management system to comply with those requirements.
So you would say that whatever those requirements are, they're less vigorous than the dynamic model that Jano's postulated.
That's correct.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, I'm assuming all these recommendations, the follow-through, are going to go through the audit committee or part of it through transformation. How are we going to follow up on all these?
Jano's going to have responsibility for implementing them because they're largely part of the capital planning process, and they'll be part of transformation under Anthony.
Okay, and we'll get reported.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right, Bert, Eric, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next item is adoption of the MTA 2020 budget and the 2020 to 23 financial plan. As I mentioned earlier, the agency's budget is designed to address the fiscal challenges the MTA faces while ensuring that our priorities to move the organization forward for our customers are met. I want to recognize the concerns a number of you raised on Monday and public speakers raised today, but do want to note the following. This budget includes continuing commitments to our customers, as the proposed budget includes A, no budget-driven service cuts, and B, projected biennial toll and fare increases which will remain below the rate of inflation. The financial plan also reflects our commitment to transformation and reform and reinvesting in operations so that the increase in performance we've seen in ridership and OTP continues. The budget is also a financial forecast to the best of our knowledge today. It includes assumptions, as every budget does. There'll be opportunities to revise this budget as part of the financial planning cycle in February, July, and November, as is the case every year, with the presentation of our financial plans. If our assumptions or forecasts need to change, we'll adjust it at that time. We're also taking concrete steps to manage issues such as overtime, including implementing the recommendations from the Morrison and Forrester report, setting up an overtime management task force, and we'll be reporting progress on assumptions set forth in the budget. One factual thing, facts are important, one factual point I want to make. A lot of speakers today spoke about 500 police officers in the subways. And I just want to talk about the 500 police officers before turning it over to Bob. As I mentioned before, there are approximately 88 unfilled positions in the police department. During the course of 2019, the following is a fact. 57 officers have resigned or retired. We expect that during the course of 2020, an additional 50 to 55 will retire. That's approximately 200. 200 obviously represents 40% of the proposed 500 officers, but it is also a 26% decline were it not filled in the total number of sworn officers in the police department. The point being that if we didn't hire new classes of police officers, we'd be short approximately 200 police officers, or a quarter of the size of the entire police department. And I think that point is worth noting. Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have received the material for the budget adoptions. It's on your director's desk, and you may have it physically in front of you. I'm going to go through the staff summary and hit the highlights because you're giving direction to the chair or to the CFO or any of our designees to take certain actions during the year. And so it's important that we go through what those actions are. First, the MTA board is required to adopt a balanced budget. The purpose of this staff summary is to secure MTA board adoption of the company 2020 financial proposed budget and the 4-year financial plan 2020 to 2023, which includes the 2019 November forecast and plan adjustments and authorization of budget and plan adjustments, including MTA policy actions as set forth in the staff summary. This document summarizes the November plan presented to the board for information purposes during the November board meeting, which projects ending cash balances of $143 million in 2019, $11 million in 2020, $33 million in 2021, with projected cash deficits of $212 million in 2022, $426 million in 2023. There are few changes since the November plan. The changes that we have taken, there is cashless pilot from the Long Island Railroad collection has been removed from the plan. In Metro North, there's a 1-year delay in terms of Rockland County bus subsidy, and then there's the cancellation of the new parking fee structure at Metro North. Turn to page 1-3 of the staff summary for the highlights of the November plan, which include the implementation of the transformation plan to streamline MTA's internal processes, the fact that there's no budget-driven service cuts, that it maintains prior plan investments, the Long Island Railroad's forward plan, the bus plans of New York City Transit, MTA bus, and the way ahead for Metro North. It holds projected fare and toll increases to 4% in 2021 and 2023. It has efforts to reduce fare evasion. It anticipates renegotiation with New York City for an equitable sharing of paratransit cost, captures savings from the elimination of vacant administrative positions. There's cost avoidance through fiscal constraints placed upon controllable overtime. It addresses new maintenance requirements, the hiring of the additional MTA police officers. It fortifies our technology networks, and it achieves annually recurring savings targets, which are anticipated to be $2.5 billion a year during this event.
Fuck this! This is illegitimate! This is illegitimate! This is illegitimate! No one in New York City believes that this.
So it anticipates achieving annually recurring savings targets of $2.5 billion by the end of this year, which would increase to 2.7 through 2023, and including the transformation savings, we expect to be over 3.1 billion of annually recurring savings. Now, the recommendation of staff to the board, it is recommended that the board adopt the 2020 final proposed budget and 4-year financial plan, which includes approving the 2019 November forecast and plan adjustments. The approval of this plan will supersede prior board plan approvals for this period. I want to note that the projected 2021 and 2023 fare and toll increase proposals will require separate board actions in advance of those dates. Authorize staff under the guidance and direction of the chairman, CEO, chief financial officer, or their designees to take actions to implement the policy actions set forth. Authorize staff to draw down the unexpended 2019 general reserve, $165 million, which will be used to help balance the 2020 budget. Authorize technical adjustments to the MTA budgets and forecast on a non-material nature in the 2020 February plan. Authorize adjustments of MTA budgets and forecasts to reflect labor settlements approved from time to time by the board. Authorize staff under the guidance and direction of the chairman, CEO, the chief financial officer, or their designees, including the MTA treasurer, to take additional budget or cash management actions, as has been done in the past budgets, to draw on the general reserve and or make budget adjustments to respond to unexpected expenses and or revenue subsidy shortfalls, and other actions including advancing of the Bridges and Tunnel operating surplus, use of MTA MRT2 corporate account monies, use of payroll mobility tax and replacement funds and MTA aid, authorize staff under acting under Section 1266 6-A of the Public Authorities Law to enter into interagency loan agreements among the MTA and its affiliates and subsidiaries. And I should note that if a loan is taken, it must be repaid by the end of the succeeding calendar year. And then use the stabilization reserve and provision for prompt payment of contractual obligations. Mr. Chair, that concludes the summary of the staff summary.
Well, let me just make one factual thing before I call on Commissioner Feinberg. I'll just note page I-8 notes that total fare box revenue for 2020 is approximately $6 billion, which obviously is a huge source and an important, irreplaceable source of revenue for the MTA. Commissioner Feinberg.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to start with a bit of a reality check on the crime and policing discussion. First, and I've said this over and over again, I think it's important for people to take a look at the data, and not the data through any specific lens, and you don't even have to look at the data that's provided to the board, because in some ways that you may view that data as slanted, but also not the data the Brennan Center pulled together that doesn't include everything, and heaven knows not the data that's thrown around on Twitter. But I think it's important to take a look at the numbers. So here are the numbers as I see them year to date, and I believe that these are accurate. 1,653 assaults, 852 sex crimes, not including groping, public lewdness, and not including some particularly heinous sex crimes I won't delve into in a public hearing. 1,989 robberies and grand larcenies. These numbers also do not include some portion of the hate crimes that we were discussing earlier this morning. So if you believe these numbers are wrong, I would love to know. I believe that they're accurate. I've double-checked them with various folks here several times. If you think they're exaggerated or inaccurate, we should talk about it. But I don't actually think these numbers are wrong, and it's just that somehow we find them acceptable. And they're not. They're just not acceptable. So nearly 2,000 assaults, 2,000 robberies, and nearly 1,000 major sex crimes is not okay. We live in a big city. We have the largest transit system in the country, but these are unacceptable numbers. And for the life of me, even if you do not believe these numbers are ticking up, if you think that this is the status quo, that's also not acceptable. It's not. This is not an acceptable level of behavior. So I know that everyone on this board wants New York City to be the shining light of the transit system for the country and for the world. That is not what we are right now. That is not where we are with these numbers. So, lots of arguments today and in recent weeks against additional MTA police. Interestingly, almost all of these arguments come down to distrust in the NYPD. And I hear you, folks. I agree with you. The record is troubling. But to be clear, why are those issues being brought to this board? The MTA is not in charge of the NYPD. We never have, we never will be. And so we're talking about hiring MTA police. The MTA board cannot resolve decades of issues with the NYPD. And frankly, if there are a bunch of concerns, they should be taken to the mayor and to the mayor's office. This board can barely, with all due respect, I think we're doing great work. We can barely improve service, pass a budget and a capital plan. We cannot fix decades of NYPD issues. So if you have if you've got concerns, I don't understand why the criticism lives here. But criticism of the NYPD is also a bit of a cop-out, because we're not talking about the NYPD, we're talking about growing an MTA police force that we would have additional control over, that we would do the training of, that we would provide guidance of how we want issues to be dealt with, whether they're social services issues or crime issues or summons or fare evasion. We would have more control than we have over the NYPD. So finally, it's enough on policing. But on the overall budget, budgets are not clean decisions. We all know that, right? Whether you're on a city council, you're on a board, you're in the Congress, they're not clean decisions. So I'll wait, I guess. So they never are. And budgets are about decisions, but they're also, large, hulking documents, and it's hard to be fully in favor of one or fully against. So just to be clear, I think it's important that this budget be viewed as an investment in accessibility, an investment in improving safety and security, an investment in improving service, but it's also a vote in belief that we have a labor agreement that is positive and that's moving forward, that we're on the right path of accessibility, and that we're on the right path in terms of our investments in the system. And so I'm going to vote yes. I urge a yes vote. None of these decisions are easy or clean, but I think we're on the right path.
Commissioner
Thank you.
Vanderpool, Commissioner Lynn, and Commissioner Mack.
Thank you. With regards to the discussion about the hiring of additional police officers, there's been this unfair positioning of this discussion as binary, such that if you are against adding this additional workforce and paying for this, that you are for crime increasing in the subway, and that you are one who is willing to risk your personal safety. And I think that binary positioning that I've seen and heard from a variety of different people and places and forums is incorrect. This is not a binary discussion because you're against $249 million in this budget, that you're against safety in the system. I don't think anyone is saying that. I certainly am not. This might be the fourth time that I'm going to make this comment. And the comment is, it would be great to know what the deployment of resources is. What is our strategy here? I have heard people in this discussion double down on statistics. I have heard them double down on the reasons why this is needed in our system. What I've not heard people double down on is a deployment strategy. We could have heard things like, we are going to look at our existing strategy of our existing police forces to determine what modifications might be needed. We could have heard a public statement about the ongoing training and future training and efforts to encourage and support balanced and equitable police enforcement. We could have looked at the methodology for how, or heard something about the methodology for how these new resources will be deployed. We could have heard a discussion about specific strategies to address issues such as hate crimes, which we have seen increase in our subways. We could have heard a discussion on the timeline and the measures of success. We've not heard any of that. We've just heard people double down on the numbers. And when we talk about a deployment of resources and a deployment of, a discussion of strategies, we could have heard any of those things, and we've not. And that continues to sow discord and frustration in this discussion. This is not a binary discussion. This is not, we are against officers because we are against safety in the system. I was very encouraged to hear a young man in today's testimony talk about violence interrupters. I had never heard of this program. I asked my fellow commissioner here, David Jones, if he'd heard of it, and he'd not. And in fact, when I first made this comment about deployment of resources and measures several meetings ago, I made the example of having visited Chicago and seeing station agents at the turnstiles. The larger point was, what other strategies might we consider to improve public safety? And another speaker talked about public safety not being synonymous with increased police activity. I have great respect for our police force, and I'm thankful for all the improvements that they've made in the system that I have relied on I've only lived in New York for all the time that I've lived in New York, and I'm thankful for that. And I am pretty confident that our law enforcement, whether they're NYPD or MTA PD, are looking to improve and strategies to continue the progress that has been made. But this process has not been supportive of that. With regards to the overall budget, I have said every single year that I have tremendous respect for Bob Ferran and Patrick McCoy and the larger team for the way that you innovatively propose measures to make very difficult budget decisions. I've said before, I do not envy you nor your staff and team's work. It is a Herculean task every year that you go through. And you have been very clear about noting that every budget is based on assumptions, and you're right. What I've noticed in my tenure on the board is those assumptions have gotten bolder and grander than they have in the past. And that is certainly worrisome and concerning, particularly around paratransit. We've talked about this. New York City has contributed. I think the assumptions that are built into the budget at 5% increases don't even reflect the actual increases that we've seen in paratransit. And New York City has been concerned about assuming that risk. New York City has been a very valuable partner on the operating budget, certainly on the capital budget. This is not about New York City not supporting accessibility, and I would hate to hear someone position it that way, particularly when, as I've said before, for the $3 billion request of New York City for the capital program geared toward accessibility, New York City didn't even blink. So to position this as New York City being against accessibility is wrong and flawed and disingenuous. Thirdly, with regard to bold budget assumptions, I had asked previously what the aggregate amount of money for the transformation plan in our operating budget would be. And I was not given an answer, and we still don't have an answer. We know that there's 49 positions being hired. We have new leadership, and those budget assumptions are worked into this document that we're expected to vote on without even having a lot of the details on that. And I see that as incredibly problematic. So while I have over the years supported budgets and voted yes, during very difficult times, I have to vote no because I see the assumptions here as getting more worrisome and more bold. And I am always worried about, as many of us around, all of us around the table and beyond are concerned about the impact on our customers. But these bold assumptions are leading us down a very troublesome trajectory.
Commissioner Lynn, Commissioner Mack. Commissioner Jones.
Thank you. Let me start by saying this is now about 5 months since I've joined the board, and I want to compliment some extraordinary work that's been done by you, Pat, by Bob Ferran, by so many people. Jano, so many people I've come across and impressive. And I want to also compliment the reaching of a labor deal because I think we would be having a very different conversation now if at this point we didn't have a labor deal and we were approaching the Christmas holidays. And I hope that I have been helpful in changing the direction for what I thought was a very confrontational and not very constructive approach to a collaborative approach to reaching a settlement. And so I think that a lot of important things have happened. But I, too, with Commissioner Vanderpool's remarks, have a tremendous concern of what we do as a board and how we look at the a financial plan and budget. I find ourselves laden with thousands of pages of documents to look at each month and not having nearly sufficient time to discuss the 10, 15, 20 pages that really drive the things that we should be involved with. And you've all heard comments I've been making about the financial plan before, so I'm only going to just briefly mention, for instance, the labor agreement. The labor agreement, which I applaud, it's so important that we have, is not an unknown going forward. The cost is a known, and it is not responsible to know that in front of us and to have language that we need to negotiate affordable labor agreements as a risk. We know what the contract is. It's not going to be less than that, and we should be budgeting and planning for documents we know, for agreements that we know. I understand it's going to come back. That's always the approach, which is, look, we can always come back and amend things. But we now know that. The reducing fair revenue loss, to me, is something that we've talked about for months and months and months. And I've been asking for programs and specificity And I don't think we've gotten it. I know that there's in here $62 million that we're adding for a fair prevention team, a task force, and that is really offset against the $200 million that you think you're going to save. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? I think that we as a board need to know more about that. The cost of the 500 cops. I have to say that, and I've described it on Monday, a little bit like manna from heaven, these cops. There's fare evasion started, then homelessness, then quality of life, then crime prevention, which is now a lot of discussion about that. Terrorism prevention was on the list for a while. And I've said, I think things are missing. For instance, supervisors. Now, I did take a hard look at the budget, and there, lo and behold, 100 more supervisors in security that hadn't been discussed before. People talk about the 500 police officers, and I hear Pat now say, well, you know, really 40% of that is to replace attrition. And that it's a different number than the one we've been talking about. I see when you look hard at the numbers on page 66 of your document, there is a $15 million reduction in overtime. So clearly the new hires are thought to reduce overtime. There's a lot of stuff going on that I had to sort of look line by line and page by page of the documentation as opposed to a presentation of what we're really talking about, and that has been missing. The control of overtime is something that we've been, again, talking about over and over again. To the extent that 16 million of overtime in security is part of the savings that's being projected, that's through new hires. That's not through control of overtime. That's through bringing in new workforce. Again, we need to be treated as adults as board members. We need to be presented with the data, and we need to be to hear it. The inclusion of the dollars from the city on the renegotiation of paratransit, that hasn't happened. There are discussions. I have not heard that there's movement moving forward in terms of identifying dollars. Those are dollars, 50 million in this budget year, which is not being covered. On the Alex partnered material, which Anthony, this is now yours. 1.6 billion of savings, 2,700 personnel reductions. I haven't seen what they're going to look like, and we're 2 weeks from the beginning of the budget year. When are we going to see that? So I've said before, I am old-fashioned. I believe in the teachings of Hugh Carey and Phillips Roden and Ed Koch, that there ought to be a serious look when we know what expenditures, we know what costs are going to be, we should account for them. Now, when I said this, I then note that Tim Minton was quoted as saying that, I'm one of those we, have not heard solutions from the members of the serious financial challenges facing the MTA. That's a little bit Trumpian in my mind, of accusing those that say, look, there are problems here, and you're not coming up with solutions. But in the spirit of trying to find solutions, let me suggest this. During the fiscal crisis days of the city, we had, very similar to your types of programs of budget relief, we had programs to eliminate the gap, PEGs. And when we had hard budgeting times, we put in supplemental contingency PEGs. And I believe that what is missing here are the supplemental contingency programs to eliminate the gap. We ought to be looking at them constantly. We ought to be knowing the trade-offs. We ought to be doing before we vote for a financial plan at this point. We should have had in front of us. Boy, if these things don't happen, if the revenues don't come in from the city, if we don't get the fare reduction, these are the types of programs we're going to have to deal with, and everyone should have their eyes open that these are the programs. And we shouldn't, on a one-off basis, be going from month to month to month, plugging holes. We should be looking systematically, and that should be part of our process. I am going to be voting against the financial plan, and I hope that we can enter into a program like this going forward.
All right, so before I call on Mr. Mack, Mr. Brown, Mr. Zuckerman, do you want to just talk about the BRPs and the fact that those things are all in place, Bob?
Yeah. Every year we put budget reduction program, PEGs if you want to call them that, in place. That's how we've achieved the $2.5 billion of annually recurring savings. If you recall, we've had them in the past in July where we didn't identify what the efforts were going to be. At the beginning of the year, we said, here's a target. We're going to come up with plans, working with the agency presidents to identify things. We've done that. So that is in place. We're always looking for additional savings. What we found is that some of those affected service. And we got the message very clearly saying we did not want to see any budget-driven service cuts in this budget. So again, it has gotten bolder, as Commissioner Vanderpool said, because we are having to do, make tougher and tougher decisions. But we continue to put in place budget reduction programs, some identified, some not identified at the time they go in, but we do work with the agencies to see where we can save money. And so that's an ongoing process.
You misunderstood my point. Not that I understand there's over $2 billion of budget reduction plans here. What I was suggesting was, in addition to those, there should be contingency budget reduction plans that go into effect if various things don't occur. And that there could be a list of some very hard, tough choices, but we could understand what they look like and we could have them up front. I'm not suggesting you have been doing tremendous amount of budget relief. I'm suggesting that there also ought to be a contingency plan for if many of these things that we're now talking about, which you yourself say are very difficult and you worry about them, and I assume keep you up at night, whether we have, what is the backfill plan if in fact these don't occur?
All right, so Mr. Mack, Mr. Brown, Mr. Zuckerman, Mr. Albert, Commissioner Jones.
Pat, number one was thank you for enlightening us regarding the numbers. But I've been in government since I'm 16 years old, under Rockefeller and on. I find that when you do have a shortage of personnel, you incur major overtime, without a doubt, because positions and contracts have to be fulfilled. I thought it's out of the ordinary that people would object to safety. It's a mind-boggling thing that you wouldn't want to be safe. And these men and women will not only be for the subways, they'll be for the whole system. And it will absolutely, from what I have seen in the 80s, in my own county, where we had the exact same problem of major overtime in the police department, was new hires, and within a year, we cut the overtime. I think we got to go forward. We got to have faith in our team, who's done a great job under the leadership of Pat and our other board members, and we can beat this thing to death. But we got to move forward. We got to provide safety. We got to cut overtime, and I'm voting for the budget.
Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Brown.
I'm not afraid anywhere in this system. I've really never been afraid personally anywhere in this system. However, when a crazy person gets on a train, though I'm not afraid for my personal safety, if there's a cop there, I know there's a professionally trained person to deal with that eventuality. And I don't have to figure out if I'm going to do something stupid because he's crazy. So everybody gets a little more secure in a certain sense when they see the cops. Now, as to the data, I don't think the data is in any way convincing. This is law of small numbers for the most part. And, I don't think you resting the case on the numbers doesn't convince us. People are really ethereally affected by their feelings of insecurity, which can be driven by a whole variety of factors. Now, as to the pegs, though, and how their relationship is to the insecurity, people are much more secure when there's a station agent in the booth, too. And over the years, through many cycles of financial plans and cutting away, which was alleged to be fat, as you eliminated those positions, people became more secure. Now, I can look at that from especially in the suburban properties where you're on the platform alone if there's nobody in the booth there. And sometimes it's quite intimidating. Believe it or not, there's some pretty tough neighborhoods in the suburbs. And people really watch their back. And I personally find that, pretty intimidating myself. If I'm the only person there, it's a lot more intimidating than it is anywhere else. But, I don't think you're trying to make the case with numbers. But I think that if you're looking to, provide more security, don't forget that you've imparted more insecurity by cutting those agents in the course of cost savings over the years. And if you can afford these cops, I say maybe you can afford to put people back in those booths.
Commissioner Zuckerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a personal comment and a couple of remarks on the budget. The public comments were fairly intense and vitriolic today, and I get the sense that the public sometimes doesn't realize that everyone around this table is a New Yorker. I'm a Jew. I'm a disabled veteran. I was born in the Bronx. I grew up in Westchester. I live in Putnam County. I work in Manhattan. But I'm a New Yorker. I spend my summers in Nassau County. Cousins in Rockland. I can keep going on. I'm a real New Yorker. Yeah. And I know, and I went to college in Orange County, if Susan was here. So if I did that with each of you, I know we'd all have a pretty amazing, diverse experience. But we're all New Yorkers here, and we are all unpaid, committed volunteers to making sure this system works. And I get very bothered when I have people maligning each of our intentions. And I just want to say that on behalf of each of us and myself, that I know we're all here trying to do our damnedest. We have different constituencies we try to advocate for, but we are here to support New York, and I think that's important to say. So on the budget, first of all, I want to support in part what Sarah was saying. One of the things I love about this governor is he takes action. He's a very action-oriented person. The notion that we are hiring our own cops in the subways to create action. You can debate what the number is. I don't know what the right number is supposed to be, and I don't know what the details are of the plan. But the notion that he is hiring cops, we are hiring cops to do what is necessary in our territory, I applaud. It is empirically true that the homeless problem has gotten worse in New York. It is empirically true that the subway is... All right, sir, thank you very much. Let me finish. You had your chance. It's empirically true that the subway has gotten less safe. I agree with Norman. I feel safe, but it is less safe than it once was, and so we're taking our own action, which I applaud. All right, now on the budget and on the plan. So Bob Foran, I've known you now 5 years. You are an extraordinary CFO. The techniques that Bob Lynn is talking about, whether from the Koch administration or from the de Blasio administration in between, I know you know those moves, and I applaud. I've watched your budgets, your BRPs. You know the tricks of being a CFO, private and public sector, and I appreciate that. What I will say is 3 points about the budget. The first is the plan, and it's about the plan. The budget I'm okay with, and I do appreciate the accommodation towards Metro North and my riders, because paying increases, whether small amounts on parking or overall, are reaching a point. So on the 5-year period or the 4-year period of the plan, there's a few things I am concerned about. I will support it, I do support it, but there are legitimate concerns we all have to be concerned about. I don't want to speak for my colleague, Mr. Law, but when you're paying $6,000 a year for commuting on Metro North or Long Island Railroad, and then 40% pay another $1,500 a year to take a Metro card, $7,500 a year is a lot of money, ladies and gentlemen. And 2% a year or 4% every 2 years, which is in our biannual increase, it's still real money. And there's a point where blood can't come out of a stone, and a lot of my folks in my territory are becoming stones. We're reaching a point where if you make 42 grand a year and you're paying $7,500 to us, that's pretty expensive. And I don't want to talk about the notion, I'm not pitting city against suburb, but that's a lot of money. The second thing I want to talk about is Assemblywoman Paulin came and talked about the capital plan. Let's not forget that when you increase capital spend, you buy stuff, you got to run the stuff. And we've got now not $250 but $200 million in 2022 to run East Side Access. We've got $100 million to run Second Avenue Subway. I don't know what Penn Station Access is going to cost to operate, but we're taking material increases in our operating expense to run this new stuff that satisfies needs for growth, which is great. But even, as we know from the Long Island budget, we have a 14% increase in expenses on a 1% increase in revenue because we got to run this stuff that we're building. It's not insignificant. We've got to make sure, as I've said in an analogy before, that we stop the leaking roof before we keep adding wings to the house. My last comment is, I guess, in some ways targeted you, Mr. McCord. Not targeted, but and I guess in support of your Herculean task you have in front of you. As you recall, this budget was before the previous version was in 2022 we'd have a $1 billion deficit. So now in 2022, we got a $200 million deficit and a $500 million deficit in 2023. And that's after, Anthony, we've already included all the cost savings, 100% of them, I think, that our friends from Alex Partners identified. You have a massive job in front of you, a massive job in front of you. We're all here to help you. We'll do whatever we can. But it is not guaranteed you're going to get all those dollars out. That's on top of all the BRPs that Bob keeps doing. And since I joined this board, you've all heard me say, I don't know if we're at fat. I don't think we are. We may be at muscle and probably close to bone in some places. So I look to you, Anthony, with a great deal of appreciation, respect, awe, and a little fear because you've got a lot of work to do in front of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Albert.
So everyone who knows me knows I've been speaking for riders. That's really what I do. That's why I'm here. Service has always been the most important issue to me, the quality of service, the way our stations are, the rolling stock, the frequency, all of that. And because I care that much about service, that is why I'm supporting the addition of the extra police officers. And I'll tell you why in a moment. When Bill Bratton was the head of the transit division of the NYPD, he had a policy, stop crime at the turnstiles and you'll stop crime in the system. It's not like you're in the street. You're in a more confined area. So if you can stop any ill-meaning people at the turnstiles, you've made your entire ridership safe, which is good for everybody. I think the officers will stop fare evasion. I think they will stop attacks on transit personnel. Just the other day, a motorman stopped his train, opened his window to look out on the platform, and was bashed in the face by somebody, by a crazy person. So I think they will do all of that. I think they will stop quality of life crimes. Anybody that rides the train frequently, you cannot ride a train now without being harangued for money by either a beggar, a musician. There are homeless all over the place. People who live in the transit system, it is not good for them to be ingesting rail dust 24/7. It's bad for them. It's bad for the system. So I think the police will do all of this. Now, fare evasion this year is estimated to hit almost $300 million. That's a lot of service. That's more than the next fare increase is going to bring in. We have to get a handle on that. I am really afraid that at some point a bean counter is going to look at the lesser registrations on the turnstiles and on the bus fare boxes and say, wow, look, ridership is down. We have to cut service. That's going to affect everybody, but mostly it'll affect people in our poorest neighborhoods. That's not good for anybody. That's why I think we've got to get a handle on this fare evasion. Now, I think it's really important to know how they will be deployed through the system, in how many places on the commuter rails as well as on the transit system. That's really important. I think we have to look at our fare entry system, which has become a sieve. If you ride the system as often as I do, specifically in places that are non-attended entrances, you will see people waiting. They'll wait for several trains for somebody to exit through the slam gates, and then they will rush in. It is all walks of life now. It is not anything like it used to be. It's people in suits, it's people rushing who see a train on the platform and think, oh, well, I don't want to miss this train. Let me just run in as somebody's opening the slam gate. It is out of control, and I think we need to get a handle on it so that we can continue to provide service at the level that everybody would like to see. And one last thing is the issue of the toll rebates for the Henry Hudson and the Cross Bay Bridge in the general vote, or will that be voted on separately?
It'll be voted on separately. It's not part of the
not part of the budget.
It's part of the TBTA committee.
Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Jones, Commissioner Mahika.
So, just going back historically, why I've decided to vote no on this, because of the addition of additional police. Let me take you back. Obviously, when I first was nominated and came to this board, it was to focus on affordability and accessibility. And I was happy to be part of the effort for fair fares, for half-price fare for people below the poverty line. That affects about 750,000 people. Basically, about 95,000 have been signed up so far, but we still have 600,000 to come. We got every indication from our survey work and the rest that at least one of the motivators for fare evasion was the issue of affordability.
Okay.
That's been great, and this board and the staff has been extraordinarily helpful, as well as obviously the City of New York, who's going to undertake the payment of this amount to offset the costs that are being lost by the MTA. So I'm very pleased with that work. But in my very first meeting, and the reason I've become so adamant about this, it was routinely reported that more than 90% of the stops, 90% of the arrests were black and brown people. And when I looked further into this, it was concentrated in predominantly poor black and brown neighborhoods. When I asked the then chief, why were there no arrests in the 2nd Avenue subway, I was told we only go where the crime is. So there's a predicate here, particularly for someone like me who grew up in Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, where essentially stop and frisk was the order of the day of my youth, that there's a built-up problem here of over-enforcement in poor neighborhoods. So it's not in isolation I'm talking about this, nor is it really against what the efforts have been by Chief Delatorre to start to shift this. But the history here of over-enforcement and abuse of black and brown, particularly young people, is the sort of context we're working under. I believe what Commissioner Feinberg said is absolutely correct, that now, we didn't control the police force, now we will. But when I came to that meeting, I was the first one to raise, how could you get such skewed results and no one was questioning before Veronica and I came on the board? So to countenance something in our system for so many years and do nothing about it gives the impression that we endorse it. I'm very happy to hear that we're going to have a new day. But you have to understand there's a lot of concern now with this new infusion of police force, which interestingly enough is going to be 2 separate police forces. This hasn't happened, I think, since early New York, where you had competing police forces. It happened, that's true, with NYCHA. That came together. But how are they going to coordinate? All this stuff comes up. And basically, I feel that we're essentially being mandated to do something without a board discussion that could let us dig into all these multiple issues before we're going to commit substantial amounts of money, $250 million. So all of those things are going on here. I do think $250 million over the term of the contract going forward is substantial. Obviously, we hear time after time the needs we have in this system that may have to be foregone because we're putting this money in this direction rather than accessibility or other things. I've raised the question also, are police the right way to go? Should we have our own system of essentially meter people who stand in front of the gates and have communication when needed? But we know that uniformed people have an immediate impact in dropping fare evasion and other things. We've also seen, I know it's been discounted, the Brennan Center's recent report showing that basically, yes, any kind of crime in a system is intolerable, but crime has been stabilized and dropping with the work of the police department. I was also upset when I was told by the chief at that time that in the police department's NYPD in the transit, 2/3 of their work was fare evasion. not helping old ladies down the stairs, helping people take their, carriages with kids down, protecting people from being pushed off the platforms. That wasn't the agenda. You have one photograph you may have even seen of a police officer standing looking through a bathroom grill so he can watch a young person jumping over a turnstile so he can make an arrest. So again, I'm not doing this in any way to denigrate what's being done here or what's trying to be done, but I can't accept this kind of infusion, which we really didn't participate in the decision-making of, without essentially making what I see as a protest vote. There's just too much history of abuse here for me to let it pass. And for that reason, I will vote no to this particular budget. Thank you.
Commissioner Mahika, Commissioner Mihols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I just want to talk about what's actually in the budget so we know what we're voting for and what we're voting against. It's a $16.9 billion budget just in the 1 year. It's $800 million down from the November plan, and that's part of all of our discussions in a desire to control costs, not have fares go up. So as a result of doing that, Bob did a good job of lowering the budget. So actually, we're at a year-over-year decrease in our overall spend in the budget, which I think is important to understand. And that is done, again, we're trying to protect the customers and we're trying to protect the fare box. It supports the funding for 74,000 employees. The vast majority of them are union employees. We have a responsibility to pass a budget by January 1st, and we have a responsibility to fund those employees. It funds a 4-year contract for 37,000 transit workers. We sat here for months listening to the transit workers who wanted a fair contract. It was a struggle to get there. They agreed to a contract. We hope it's ratified. It funds the contract for 37 transit workers. There are no budget-driven service reductions in here. We spent months talking about service reductions. We spent months talking about that we did not want to have service reductions, and the budget includes no budget-driven service reductions. It includes funding to implement the $52 billion capital plan. The capital plan is 70% larger than the previous capital plan. We have to give the resources to the management teams in order so that they can implement this very aggressive plan. If they don't, they're not going to be able to execute it, and you're not going to get all of the things that everybody here wanted when they voted for that capital plan. On the numbers, we seem here sometimes to multiply numbers by 5 when we want to emphasize the point of how much something costs, and then we do the 1-year number when we want to say that it's going to cost less. So just to put everything into perspective, based on the fare evasion numbers that we have, we're looking at $1.5 billion in lost revenue over the plan period. $1.5 billion in revenue over the plan period. That's more than the fare increase, more than the state legislature authorized for the MTA the last time when they gave us $400 million per year. It is 13 times the increment of the labor contract. 13 times. It is 10 times the cost of the additional police, okay? On perspective also, 1/3 of 1% is what the police are, the increase for the police are in this budget. 1/3 of 1%. We are funding 70 accessible stations. That's the goal. It is more aggressive than anyone thought we would. We have a responsibility to start that. We have a responsibility to the budget and get that actually done. The legislature 2 years ago authorized $2 billion. We multiply everything by 5 here. $2 billion in additional operating support from the original congestion pricing surcharge. So in addition to the capital plan, there is $2 billion in this plan from the congestion surcharge to fund the operating budget of this plan. On where the money comes from, I think it's important. Again, facts actually matter. Pat stole my line earlier, but facts do matter. 33% of the operating, we recover 33% from fares. 33%. That means 67% of the revenue to support the MTA comes from people who are not actually taking the system. it's other taxpayers who are actually supporting it. You have a third that's coming from the tolling, third that's coming from fares, and then 67% from other people that are paying other taxes to take a system. Benefits them, but they're not necessarily users because they're not paying the fares. Last year, the legislature passed legislation that required that we make changes. It was 6 months ago, that we made changes to the way the MTA does business. They said they weren't going to authorize any new money for the MTA unless we made management changes, unless we changed the way we do business. And we need better management. We have that. The presidents have stepped up. We have a new transformation person who stepped up. The current leadership has stepped up. And we're getting there. We have a long way to go. But they required that. We as a board all sat here and approved a transformation plan. We have a responsibility to fund and make sure that that is executed. We approved the capital plan. We have a responsibility now to fund the budget to execute the capital plan. The legislature required a forensic audit. We just got briefed on the forensic audit today. We did it early because some people said they didn't want to support the budget. They didn't think we should unless we saw the results of the forensic audit. We have it. The forensic audit identifies shortcomings. It says there are many places that we could improve. We need to do things better. We expect management, I expect management, I think all of us expect management to fix these things, to make sure that there's a course correction here. We're seeing dramatic improvements in service as a result of better management, as a result of the influx in money. It's both. We said we needed money, and we said we needed better management. We're starting on the better management, and the money is there, and we have an obligation because we're not going to get any more money from the legislature unless we show the improvements. We're seeing them. These numbers that we're seeing are impressive, but we need to make sure we don't backslide. So we as a board have a responsibility to pass a budget by January 1. If we don't pass a budget by January 1, we're in violation of the Public Authorities Law. Budgets are imperfect. There are competing interests in a budget. There are competing priorities in a budget. It's easy to criticize a budget, very easy. It's much harder to put one together that actually you can adopt and move forward. So while the budget's not perfect, on balance, the facts bear out that this is a step forward. We're making improvements. There are risks in the financial plan, and we have to deal with that. The management of this budget is important. The budget is just a document that represents estimates. At the end of the day, we have to manage to that plan. And that means all the presidents have to manage to the plan. It means our new transformation team has to manage to the plan. And we as a board have to make sure that they do manage to that plan as we move forward. There will be plenty of opportunities throughout the year. We meet every month to make changes, to make adjustments, to make course corrections, and to deal with some of the issues that commissioners have raised today. So this is always a work in progress. We're making enormous amounts of improvements. I think people are seeing it. We have an obligation to represent all New Yorkers when we're supporting the budget here, not just the riders of the system, not just the people that are necessarily in this room, but everyone. So for these reasons, I'm going to support this budget.
Commissioner Malhaltis.
So I'm sorry that I'm going to repeat some things that Robert said, but a budget is about choices. It's a living, breathing document that constantly changes, and hopefully we will make the changes that need to be made. But I believe right now we're making the right choice by voting on this budget. There's no service cuts. There's no fare increases. It provides a fair labor contract. It adds new MTA police officers that I believe will provide a level of security. And I really do believe this is a good budget. So thank you, Bob, and the whole finance staff and team for putting this all together. And I proudly vote aye for this.
Commissioner Herman.
I am going to vote for this budget also. It's not perfect. No budget is perfect. When it comes to the MTA police, I see them more as doing something for the commuter railroads where I ride, where I can say in New York City Transit, I feel relatively safe because there's many NYPD officers there. But on the commuter railroads, when I ride, in many of the stations, you never see any police officers. And that would probably because, not listening to them, the numbers are down. They have such attrition, they can't deploy them where they're needed. So it is necessary, in my opinion, because the commuter railroads deserve to have the same level of safety or feeling of safety as the subways. But I don't see them as an infusion into the New York City subways. I see them more for the commuter railroads. And I do believe that there are things in here that I could disagree with, but overall, I think Bob and his staff has done a great job. And as Commissioner Feinberg said, we're voting for an investment in what we believe is the future, the change that we want to see. So I will vote yes for this budget.
Commissioner Lacewell.
Thank you. At this point, almost all things have been said, just not all by the same people, as the saying goes. No budget is perfect. That includes an organization this large. This one, I think, gets it as close to right as possible for the reasons expressed by my neighbor here on the board. I do think on the police issue, we would be very well served to have deep briefing on the forward-going plan as we move forward. And if some of that, for security reasons, needs to be non-public, I respect that. But we need public discussion as well, I think, to help increase public trust in the moves that we make with respect to law enforcement and our transit system. I am very sympathetic to the concerns expressed by Commissioner Jones about historic issues with some in law enforcement. I emphasize some. I am a former federal prosecutor, and I deeply respect law enforcement. And I think even law enforcement acknowledges that there have been problems. So we want to make sure that we have transparency and light around what we're doing. But I want to also echo Commissioner Herman. Security, especially for women, in closed circumstances like subway and other train systems, is vitally important, and that peace of mind and security is brought to bear by seeing a law enforcement person whose job it is to keep everyone safe and secure. And studies show that is a deterrent to crime, and we cannot ignore that. I have personally disclosed I was a victim of a misdemeanor sex offense in the subway, and I have to say, 2 undercover law enforcement officers were on that car, and they caught the guy, and they ran after me, and they took care of it, and the DA's office did their job. So law enforcement makes a difference, and we have an obligation to keep people safe in our system in what is essentially a mini city. Thank you.
Commissioner Law.
I think I may be the only one who haven't spoken yet, so I'm not going to repeat anything that's been said. I think everybody made some very valid points, and if it's okay with the chair, I'll move to approve the budget.
I second it. So this is adoption of the MTA 2020 final proposed budget and the 4-year financial plan for the period 2020 to 23 and all other actions presented in the board materials. Commissioner Law has moved it. I second it. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Both passed. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Feinberg for a report on the Finance Committee, which I will note is the committee that will deal, Rhonda, thank you, will deal with the MTA toll rebate programs. Commissioner.
Thank you. Double duty today. The Finance Committee met this month and reports the following. There are 6 action items for board approval. The first action item to be considered is the resolution delegating authority to the MTA Chairman and Chief Executive Officer to take such actions as may be necessary or appropriate in connection with 2 MTA toll rebate programs for Bronx residents at the Henry Hudson Bridge and Queens residents at the Cross Bay Veterans Memorial Bridge, which is described in the staff summary and resolution distributed at the Bridges and Tunnels and the Finance Committee meetings. At the Finance Committee and Bridges and Tunnels Committee, Board Member Lacewell asked MTA staff to provide additional information prior to today's vote. The board has received this information, and I move this action item.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstentions or noes? No. Thank you. Commissioner.
The next item requests board approval for the documentation to issue new money bond anticipation notes and bonds to finance up to $3.75 billion of capital projects set forth in approved transit and commuter capital programs, and $525 million of new money bonds to finance capital projects set forth in approved bridges and tunnels capital programs. The third action item requests the board approve the necessary documentation to issue refunding bonds from time to time, subject to the bond refunding policy. The next item requests the board authorize the MTA Hudson Rail Yards refunding trust obligations to refund Tranche 1 of the MTA Hudson Rail Yards Trust Obligations Series 2016A to be purchased by MTA with proceeds of transportation revenue bonds issued for each purpose. The fifth action requests approval of the TBTA CBDTP Second Subordinate Revenue Resolution authorizing the issuance of second subordinate revenue bands and bonds. The last action item requests the board approve MTA and TBTA adoption of reimbursement resolutions for federal tax purposes. The committee recommends these action items, and I move them.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, I have a question regarding the previous vote. I don't recall receiving the legal memo that was requested by Commissioner Lacewell.
Who can speak to that?
Yeah.
So for the record, it was
yeah.
sent to all commissioners?
I was about to pull it up to try to remember the time, but yeah.
Okay.
There are 20 competitive procurements in the amount of 26.8.
Sorry, Commissioner. No
sorry.
votes on that one, correct? Sorry,
no
on
votes.
items 2 to 6? You put your hand up, Veronica. I think it was on the information question you just
You were
had.
going backwards. You weren't voting no on the 6.
Thank you.
There are 20 competitive procurements in the amount of $26.8 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I second, or Commissioner Zuckerman seconds? Or, no? I second them.
You second. I vote in favor.
All in favor?
So-
Aye.
So if is this inclusive of the 19 firms,
Yes.
Monica? Okay, then I, if it's, since your bench is blank, I'm recusing myself, given I'm both a member and an equity owner of the Boston Consulting Group.
Got it.
Got it.
There are 6 real estate action items this month on pages 67 through 77 of the board book distributed for this meeting. The committee recommends these real estate items, and I move them.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or against? Thank you.
This concludes the Finance Committee report. I will move on to the Transit and
Please,
Bus Committee
thank you.
report. Mr. Chairman, the Transit and Bus Committee reports the following. There are 2 competitive procurements for New York City Transit for $60.2 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against or abstentions? Thank you.
There are 2 ratifications for New York City Transit for $2.8 million. The committee recommends these ratifications, and I move them.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against or abstentions? Thank you.
This concludes the Transit and Bus Committee report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Law?
The Metro-North Railroad Committee and the Long Island Railroad Committee met on Monday and reports the following. There are 2 competitive procurements this month for approval, one for Metro-North Railroad, $10.4 million, and one for the Long Island Railroad for $2.3 billion. The committee recommended these procurements with a few abstentions, and I move them with those same abstentions.
I second them. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or noes?
This concludes the Joint Railroad Committee report.
Thank you. Commissioner Lacewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Bridges and Tunnels Committee met on Monday, and I report the following. There are 2 competitive procurements in the total amount of $6.3 million. The committee recommends these, and I move them.
I second. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? Thank you. Good. Corporate Governance Committee, I chaired on Monday. The committee recommends the board approve the 2 MTA policies which require board approval under the Public Authorities Law. Those policies are the Headquarters Drug and Alcohol Policy and the Family Medical Leave Act Policy. I move it? Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Any abstentions or noes? So, Commissioner, hold that, and I'll come right back to you. Next, the Corporate Governance Committee recommends the board approve the name changes of MTA Capital Construction to MTA Construction and Development Company and all actions that may be necessary to effectuate that name change. I move it. Do I have a second? All in favor? Any opposed or abstentions? No. Commissioner Jones.
This is a point of clarification. I know that the council that was selected to work with the board directly as our council has withdrawn for some reason. And I would ask, as we look for new council, that the entire board be engaged. If this is going to be our council, I'd like to have some part in that process. I thought the qualifications of the last council were great, but I'd still like, perhaps having practiced law for a long time, just to see what we're getting as this independent counsel for the board that you've recommended.
So, Commissioner, I think that's a fair request. Why don't we discuss offline a process for that and come back. There's no candidate that's been identified, or candidates for that matter, and we'll make that a subject of discussion in the new year. Commissioner Vanderpool.
With regards to this same inquiry, or comments rather, did governance discuss the codification of additional counsel to the board as being included in governance?
You raised it in committee. It was not discussed. We ought to put it on the agenda for Monica, why don't we do that for corporate governance and see what's an appropriate way to weave it into the corporate governance tapestry.
Thank you.
So let's do that, please.
I actually thought that it had been included. We discussed, there were a series of things we were going to discuss in January, such as the proposals that were made externally about governance.
Sorry, Commissioner, I don't think there was any action taken.
I think you're right, no
Motion-
action,
yeah.
but we discussed it.
So I think we ought to, we put it on the list for corporate governance, which presumably be in the March board cycle.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please, Commissioner.
So there was a typo in the Transit and Bus Committee's notes, and so we need to go back and redo the competitive procurements. So my apologies, and we'll move quickly. There are 2 competitive procurements for New York City Transit for $600.2 million. The committee recommends these procurements, and I move them.
I still second them. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions or noes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. I think now we'll have a report from the Inspector General.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, I have a cold. Good afternoon to all of the board members, the agency presidents. A special welcome to Anthony from my entire office. We welcome you. My team and I are very much looking forward to working closely with you. And I also want to give a fond farewell to Commissioner Vanderpool. You have been a tireless advocate for riders and the public, and from everyone in my office, we truly appreciate your public service. I want to talk to you about the approach my office is taking, which is a focus on systemic issues, and this is a renewed and important aspect to my office's work. We are monitoring the systemic, big picture issues that are confronting the MTA. Currently, my office is monitoring many major MTA initiatives, whether it's homelessness, whether it's overtime or transformation. And what that means as a practical matter is that my team is speaking and working with MTA folks regularly on issues while they're being worked on. And by providing high-level oversight to these initiatives now, we will be better positioned to report on progress, raise issues and concerns closer to real time, and track metrics and make sure issues are fixed quickly and appropriately. And additionally, this oversight allows me to provide increased transparency to this board by providing all of you with an objective view on the progress and the weaknesses of various initiatives. So one way that my office is able to provide objective information to the board and to the public is through our role as a monitor for the MTA-wide overtime task force. My staff, on a positive note, has observed very genuine efforts from the task force to implement the recommendations of the Morrison and Foster report, as well as my office's reports. And while there has been great progress, there also has been delay in certain areas that are important, and I want to mention them so that the board is aware of them. One is the recommendation to develop a protocol to identify who the high overtime earners are and how the agencies are to respond once those high overtime earners are identified. That had a deadline of November 30th, and we're in December. It still has not been implemented. There is at least progress. The task force is working on a draft and has obtained preliminary buy-in from some, but not all, of the agencies. It's important that obviously that protocol be codified very soon. A second area of concern that I want to bring to your attention, I wrote to the board in October about the implementation of biometric timekeeping clocks. And to their credit, the MTA has made significant strides. Very impressively, biometric clock usage has almost doubled. It may even have more than doubled by today's date between October and December. So that's very positive. But I still have remaining concerns. In my office's report on 75 of the top overtime earners across the MTA, I specifically highlighted employees who work primarily in the field, in remote off-site locations, under varying supervisors, and in certain cases, under no supervisors at all. And our report, and I should note Beth Keating, the head of my audit team next to me, it was her and her team who did this deep dive on 75 of the top overtime earners. Our report specifically showed that the absence of a proper system to verify these employees' time and attendance for overtime hours could create opportunities for employees to claim overtime that was not worked or even assigned to them without detection. And that's a serious management problem. That many of these high overtime earning employees are the ones who still don't have access to biometric clocks remains a management problem. And so while it may seem like a minority of employees are without access to biometric timekeeping at this point in time, in some ways it's the most critical group for management to address. And a third area of concern is that at the rate of progress that we're going currently, managers won't be without the benefit of Kronos timekeeping data for many of their employees by mid-January, which was a date by which MTA promised their rollout. Pardon for having the frog in my voice. On a positive note, my office has an excellent, truly excellent working relationship with the task force, and many kudos to Weil Hibry and his team. They are working incredibly hard, and very importantly, they're getting us what we need. They're being transparent, and I really appreciate it. So I will continue to update the board on these efforts as they progress. On a related note to biometric timekeeping clocks, as I informed the board last week, there have now been 9 apparent acts of vandalism against biometric clocks. An additional incident is under review. These are up on the screen, are areas where these have occurred. This has all occurred just in the past 7 months, including we had 3 incidents that are under review in a 1-week time period alone. These are expensive pieces of equipment. They cost a few $1,000s a piece. It is a crime to intentionally damage them. And as our investigators have heard from many employees over the course of these investigations, these apparent acts of vandalism are not just an affront to the public and to the taxpayers, but also to hardworking and dedicated workers, and they have expressed how upset they are to my investigators. I do want to acknowledge President Byford and his security and IT teams. Thank you for helping us develop a joint protocol for responding to these locations and for quickly alerting us to new incidents. And I also want to thank you, Chairman Foy, for your commitment to strategically installing cameras. Hopeful that these efforts will provide a deterrence. Which brings me to transformation. I had hoped to have more for the board today on the subject of transformation, But as to be expected, the transformation efforts have been challenging for us to monitor without a leader in place. My office for months has found it challenging and slow going to receive information about transformation and that effort. I now expect that's going to change. Anthony and I had an excellent, very robust, healthy, productive conversation. He is committed to transparency, I believe, and cooperation going forward. And I also pledged all of my office's resources to assist him. We want him to be successful. On this front, I hope to provide the board with ongoing transparency and insight into how transformation progresses. As I know you receive updates from me in real time at this point, I'm just going to briefly touch on the recent reports that my office has released since I last spoke to you in September. In the last 3 months, my office has released reports on sound hiring practices, sound time and attendance practices, and sound safety practices. And I think you could just put those up on the board for us. Thank you. I very much appreciate the President's responses to all of our reports. They were very positive and accepting of our recommendations. In addition to all of this, my office still has more work coming up on the horizon. This includes finalizing the reports, Chairman, that you requested on inventory, security, and procurement. We're working on best practices following a derailment, as well as escalator maintenance and other issues. So as we move into 2020, we're very much looking forward to working with the board, with Anthony and everybody in this room, and I wish everybody a happy holiday.
I just wanted to express my appreciation for the update across the board and for being clear and articulate about each of these items. It's very helpful to get these updates and look forward to continued work together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, General. I'm also, I was very impressed when we hired you. I'm impressed with your work. I'd be more impressed if we got the reports before the media does. And so if in the future you could try to get the reports to the board before we read about them in the paper, I think it would go a long way. Thank you.
So if I could just make a couple of comments and then maybe ask you to respond to them. You know, the overtime issue has been an ongoing thing. And I think from what I've heard time and time again, a lot of it is management issues and not being able to account for things which you've been clear on. But if I can very respectfully just continue to send the message that the underlying perception is issues with employees, especially when we refer to employees as the top earners. You know, to me, the top earners are the most dedicated, seasoned, most qualified men and women working in the field that we rely on and we continue to call to work. So while I understand there's concerns about the issue of high earners, again, just to try to be mindful that they're coming to work because they're being asked to come to work. And whatever the unions can continue to do to help and cooperate with management needs. You know, you brought up the biometric clocks, and we are all very receptive to the clocks. But then when they get vandalized, again, the perception becomes who's vandalizing them, and it's another kind of black eye for the workforce. I know that's not your office's intent. I'm not making any accusations. I kind of piggyback with Commissioner Law just said. You know, we find out a lot about these things in the media after the fact. You know, labor is continually engaged with the agency and the heads of the varying agencies of being cooperative to try to put all of this behind us when we haven't seen any real specifics of wrongdoing, which is difficult for you to determine because of the fact of the lack of management in the field, perhaps. But that's not at the fault of any of our employees, and they continue to remain frustrated with a continuing investigation and look at something where we're not seeing any real results. So all I would respectfully ask of your office is to maybe let us know when things can clearly not be targeted at employee abuse, and maybe just a clear-cut management flaw, and then be mindful of how we deliver that to the public, because it just becomes frustrating to the workforce, who continues to remain dedicated and continues to work large pieces of overtime because they have to, because of the work plan in front of them.
Commissioner Vanderpool.
Since you've been in the role, there's been significant activity looking into the MTA's practices and policies, which are intended to inform and guide so much of what the board and the staff does. And you've been incredibly effective in bringing, you and your team have been incredibly effective. I really do want to second the comment made by Commissioner Law and seconded by Commissioner Tessitore. One thing I learned from the advocacy community is it's always helpful to give a heads up, so it creates a tone of collaboration. So I see so much of the value of what you and your office do as contributing to improvements here, and less of a sort of sting operation or a gotcha. So I think as much advanced discussion you can have with the team, I think will foster that spirit of collaboration and the valuable contributions that you and your team are bringing, and improve the receptivity and discussion around many of the worthwhile findings that you bring to the table.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll take a motion to adjourn. Commissioner.
Apologies for keeping folks. We've had some discussion offline with board members and former board members and interested parties. I would like to formally request that the board take some kind of action, whether it's through a committee or subcommittee of the board, or whether management takes the lead, to put together some kind of best-in-class anti-hate campaign through our subway system, where there's a great opportunity to show that government does care and people do care, and we're going to stand up against hate, in view in particular, Chair, of the matter that you brought to the public attention through the board meeting today. And I'm sure that we could work in partnership with the ADL and other appropriate groups to add to the dialogue in a positive direction, especially where others in government, especially the federal government, are sending exactly the wrong messages and emboldening people to engage in acts of hate.
So, Commissioner, I think there'd
second
be
it.
widespread interest on the board and on the part of management in participating. Why don't we have discussions after the meeting? I think that involving groups like the ADL and other anti-hate groups of all types is appropriate, and I think given what I had the responsibility of reporting that incident today, I think we're all committed to zero tolerance for incidents like that.
Mr. Chair, if I may have just a few moments to give a parting comment. So I've been at 275 meetings, over 550 hours, over 117 days in 3.5 years. And that is the minimum. That is just the number of board meetings and committee meetings, and that does not account for all the conversations we all have and all the meetings we all have and all these other offline discussions that happen. And I do want to take the opportunity to thank the people who are often not seen at the MTA, or who are seen but are not often acknowledged. And those are people like Adrian, who take care of everything. In fact, Adrian was the first one to run behind the, the person who was running around here. There's people who are taking notes and minutes, and all of you back there who are there just in case you have to give a 5-second explanation or answer to any of the questions that we have. And those of you who are in the audience, we have the best press. The press corps is on top of these issues. You are sharp, you're accurate, you're balanced. You don't let things slip by. And having come from the advocacy community, but also watching how you have helped change this discussion from the MTA being, all these different iterations that it has been over the years, and the media has helped educate and inform the public in that way and made a savvier public. I want to thank all of you, Chairman Foy, and so many of the staff, and my fellow board members. I don't agree with a lot of you many times, but I respect all of you. I think you bring a lot of contribution and value. I want to thank my fellow commissioners that I've served with, Polly Trottenberg, Carl Weisbrot, David Jones, and Bob Lynn, and I have been in good company. Two more things. I do want to thank Mayor de Blasio. He was the first elected official who put forth a slate of people of color and women, all at the same time, not piecemeal here and there. His full slate in 2016, or really 2015, was 2 men of color and me. And I really want to thank him. I also want to thank Governor Cuomo for pushing me through. He could have said no. And in fact, someone once said to me, it is a miracle, Veronica, that you are on the board. And then lastly, I want to end by saying, diversity is important. We've all talked about it. I don't think anyone would disagree that diversity is important. It's not enough to put lip service to what diversity means. In March, I talked about me not being the only one who's checking off all these boxes of diversity. And since then, there has been changes. When I made that comment, 18% of the board were women, and now 39% of the board are women. And diversity is incredibly important because it's the lens, it's the perspective. It's not, we need that around this table. We need a board that is reflective of our writing constituency and our customers. And whomever fills this seat, I hope will do justice to that issue of diversity, to that issue of equity and balance, and be pragmatic and fair. There's a lot to support and defend of the MTA and the staff. There's a lot that we should hold this team accountable for and our elected officials. And I implore all of you in the advocacy community, make sure who fills this seat is independent and is autonomous and is not afraid to run against the grain, because that is when a lot of my no votes have not necessarily made a difference, but I have used this forum to raise issues. And we need to have board members who are not afraid to do that and not afraid to be that one lone vote, which sometimes I have been. I've not often voted no, in fact. My record shows I've most frequently voted yes, but I have not been afraid to vote no. So thank you for the support, the intellectual capacity that you all have shared, the commentary, and your constant advocacy from all of you on that side to all of you on this side. Thank you.
Commissioner.
I was going to say some nice things also, but I love your 3 boxes is going to be living on in memory, but I want you to have the last word, so I'm not going to say anything else.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all. Let me start by saying I think that 2019 was a great year for MTA customers and is ending in a great way for MTA customers. Ridership is up on New York City Transit and the Long Island Railroad, according to APTA, one of the few, Long Island Railroad, New York City Transit, one of the few public agencies in the country where that is true for the third quarter. On-time performance, we've talked a lot about extraordinary gains at New York City Transit. Terrific performance, Metro North 94% and nearly 91% for Long Island Railroad. Record capital plan approved, $51.5 billion, congestion pricing and MTA reform passed by the state legislature in the legislative session. You just saw today the budget approved for 2020. No budget-driven service cuts. No change, rather, in the policy with respect to toll and fare increases. In 2021 and 2023, it is assumed in the financial plan that they'll increase at a rate below inflation. And lastly, state legislature passed transformation legislation as part of the MTA reform. We are executing against that and are counting on $1.6 billion of transformation savings. New leadership on the part of Anthony McCord, who's now on board, and the COO will be joining us on the first of the year. And a very exciting time to be here. And with that, happy to take your questions. Please.
The meeting, there we go. Sarah Feinberg had said that the MTA police are going to be different from the NYPD. This is a whole different thing, and that we should address policing complaints about them to the mayor's office, to the NYPD themselves. The mayor has said that he's fine with this police increase as long as they work with the NYPD. So, I mean, who's going to be in charge down in the subways?
Well, look, I ought to say the following. There's a great deal of experience in New York with more than one police force. I worked at the Port Authority for a while. Port Authority's got a police force. The relationship between the Port Authority police and the NYPD is extraordinarily strong. The same is true with respect to the MTA police, and there are lots of other police forces I'm not mentioning, including federal. There's a great deal of collaboration and cooperation already between the MTA and the MTA police and the NYPD in terms of things like tabletop exercises, full-scale exercises, planning, etc. Obviously, whenever you've got more than one police force, you've got the possible risk of blue on blue, and there's color for the day and other protocols that are in place to deal with that. So this is not a new thing. The MTA police and the NYPD work closely and cooperate and collaborate closely, and I expect every reason to expect that will continue.
I just had one.
Yeah, please.
Just changing gears really quickly. The budget's out of the way, so can you give us any update on what the status of the TMRB is and how the appointments from the MTA board to it are going to work?
And we've got a long list of people who've expressed interest and others that are on the list. I would expect those appointments will be made in the new year. David.
Yeah. On another board issue, the CPRB, the Capital Program Review Board, has yet to meet. It has to meet by the end of the year, I believe. So my two questions are, is it going to meet? And if it doesn't, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm the wrong guy to ask the CPRB when they're going to meet. That question ought to be directed to the chairman of the CPRB. What was the second part?
If they don't meet by the end of the year, as my understanding is that the capital program moves forward by default. And I'm just wondering, your take on that. Is that...
Look, I think
process, right?
my expectation is that the capital plan will get approved. I'm not going to speak to how it's done procedurally, whether it's a default passage of time, et cetera. I do think legislative leaders and their staffs have been briefed extensively, as with respect to the mayor, obviously, and his staff, extensively with respect to the capital plan. We're proud of it. We're advocating for it, and we'll take as much time, whether it's in December or January, to explain it to all interested stakeholders. And obviously, elected officials in Albany and City Hall are high on that list.
Got it. And if I could get one just logistical question about the police force expansion. Yeah. You previously said that 88 of the 500 officers were through attrition.
No. Well,
So
what
now
I
it's
said
200?
what I said was 88 were unfilled positions. There's unfilled vacancies and attrition. I reported that in 2019, the year the year's about to close, 57 officers have resigned or retired. And our expectation, and that's about 7 or 7.5% of the police force, something like that. Our expectation is that in 2020, a number like 50 to 55 will resign or retire. Could be higher, it could be lower, but based on past experience, that's the number.
And so does that mean that ultimately, by how many officers is the force expanding? Because it's around 700 now. Are we going up to 1,200 or are we going up to 1,000?
No. Well, first of all, it's a little higher than 700, right? There are 88 unfilled positions. Mm-hmm. There's a total of 200 if you take the 88, the 57 that resigned or retired, and if you assume 55, which may be at the high end of the range of 50 to 55, and the number in 2020 will be what it is. So that's 40%, right, of the 500. And it's about 26% of the existing police force. And one of the points I tried to make here is if we don't have additional police hires, and I think one of the many important things of the board's approval of the budget is it enables us to fill those unfilled positions and to deal with the retirements and resignations.
So are you expanding the force by 500 officers or 300 officers?
Well, look, on a net basis, the first hires of any new class,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was, and happily it's now authorized as a result of today's votes, are going to fill unfilled positions and deal with retirements and resignations. One of the positive impacts of that is a likely reduction in police overtime. Vin.
So I guess first, can you elaborate on where the majority of the current MTA police force is allocated, and where if there's a breakdown yet on where the new police would go in terms of transit, in terms of the railroads, and then I had
Well, look, Vin, on that, we made it clear the MTA police covers the entire system, including Long Island Railroad and Metro North. There are obviously significant numbers at Penn Station and Grand Central Terminal, and they're on subways as well. I'm not going to speak to future deployment because that will be determined by the leadership of the police department when those men and women join the MTA Police Department.
And just to follow up, there was a lot of talk today about racial biases among the NYPD, and there was a point where Board Member Feinberg said, well, that's an NYPD issue, you should be going to the mayor for that, but it's also I would argue, a national issue. So how can you say that these new cops wouldn't reflect the policing that's been going on?
I don't think it's fair to say that Commissioner Feinberg was overlooking the fact that this is a regional and a national issue. I think she's very focused on that, but I think the issues she identified are real, especially with respect to the crime stats that she's cited, and obviously a sexual assault, a felony assault like the hate crime I described at the beginning of the meeting. One is too many. Clayton.
If transit worker assaults are up, and if crime is up on the transit system, point blank, why is a deployment of 500 additional officers an effective way to address that? Why not look at the larger issues that lead to more emotionally depressed people on the platform, more mentally ill people who are assaulting transit workers, and the et cetera?
Well, look, the MTA does transit and transportation. We don't set or implement homeless policy. Policies set at the state level. The city has a responsibility, a statutory and constitutional and legislative responsibility for providing shelter and other homeless services under state regulation. I'm not an expert on that. So we've got a mission. Our mission is to provide transportation services, as I've said a bunch of times and believe it strongly. Part of providing transit and transportation services is providing a safe and secure environment for our customers and workers. That we're very focused on.
You're confident that these cops will make the environment safer for your customers and workers?
Yeah, I thought the short answer is yes, absolutely. Dana?
Pat, do you think it was a mistake in 1995 for City Hall to merge the transit police with the NYPD?
I don't have a view on that, Dana. I've read a lot of the history. I think right now that merger has been in place for a long period of time. It's part of the landscape. I don't have a view on that question.
And if Bill Bratton is concerned about the sort of recreation of a separate force to police the subways, amongst other things, then why wouldn't MTA leadership be concerned as well?
Well, I think that former Commissioner Bratton's statements do two things. One is they support the case for additional police officers in the subway system and in transit in general. And obviously, Commissioner Bratton has long service in the Transit Bureau and in the NYPD, as a senior leader and ultimately a commissioner. I have a great deal of respect for that. But revisiting the 1995 debate, which is obviously affected by the political winds of the time and elected officials at the time, I don't think it's terribly productive. It's part of the policing landscape right now.
But you are revisiting it by sort of reversing course.
No, clearly not, right? One police force is 35,000 men and women strong. The MTA Police Department is a small fraction of that. The NYPD has far more men and women in the Transit Bureau than the entirety of the MTA Police Department. So we're not revisiting that. But what we are doing is adding police officers, and we believe to the MTA police, and we believe that's going to help us provide a safe and secure environment for our customers and our employees, and that's our focus. NJ.
Thanks, Pat. One of your public speakers today
said that by adding the police officers, you are militarizing the subway. So I'm wondering first if that's a phrase you would use.
I think
and if not,
I think that's absurd.
And if not, right, what would you say to people who would use that phrase, like that man and others?
Well, look, I thought look, I understand first the issue's been polled, and somebody wrote a piece about it during the week. Even the speaker who came from the advocacy group, I thought it was extraordinary when she reported that 79% of the people, and obviously they were hoping for a different result, 79% of the people surveyed in Queens supported additional police officers in the subway stations, and had not quite as high but similarly high support for it. She kind of, I guess in Ken Lovett's phrase, kind of buried the lead there, right? Because the data she cited was kind of inconsistent with what I believe was the political argument she wanted to make.
The phrase militarizing the subway, I mean, that's a strong phrase, and you had one person say it, but you had a lot of other people sort of echo that.
I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong factually. I think it's wrong rhetorically. And the 500 officers I just described, right? There are 88 unfilled positions. 57 officers resigned or retired in 2019. We expect, and it'll be higher or lower undoubtedly, but a range of between 50 and 55 retiring or resigning in 2020. The officers that the 500 are going to cover Long Island Railroad and Metro North as well. And probably per shift, you're talking about, and don't hold me to this, a number of between 40 to 60 officers per shift. That is hardly the militarization of the subways. And I think what it is a significant increase on the number of highly trained, highly skilled officers. Most of the people who are being hired in the first tranches of the new class are already sworn police officers themselves working for other police departments, and it is going to be a significant advance in providing a safe and secure environment for our customers. That's what it's about. Dan,
so the phrase you used was absurd, and you don't really understand why some people might feel less safe with more police officers in the system.
I don't, and the advocate citing the data from Queens that said 79% of people in Queens supported additional police officers in subway stations, I thought spoke for itself. Dan.
Pat, so there are going to be a certain number of MTA police officers deployed to the subway, and I think we know traditionally subway was not their turf. They were commuter rails, right? Is that?
Yeah,
okay.
Look, they have.
I just want to, my question, though, I just want to make sure we agree. So my question is, why is the NYPD Transit Bureau, in its numbers, not sufficient enough that you feel there are gaps that needed to be plugged with MTA PD? And did you ever bring these concerns to the Transit Bureau chief about holes in coverage or things getting out of hand in terms of homeless safety, assaults on transit workers?
Well, look, I'll cite one particular crime that obviously resonates here at the MTA. They all do. But the TWU has provided credible data that there's been a significant increase in assaults on transit workers on subways and on buses. That was validated by, I think it was at our September meeting, where a number of TWU members spoke about the increase in attacks. Attacks on transit workers, whether subways or buses, is a Class D felony. We're going to argue hard with prosecutors and police forces, every police force that touches this, that ought to be enforced rigorously where the kind of the predicate facts of a Class D felony are established.
No, Pat, my question was not that there are assaults on transit workers and they're up. I've seen the data. I take it as, the data it is. My question is, why isn't the NYPD and its numbers in the Transit Bureau sufficient to address those assaults on transit workers?
Look, the Transit Bureau does a fine job. We've made a decision that in order, and as the budget director pointed out, it's 1/3% of the budget, that to provide a safe and secure environment, which is, we believe, our responsibility, that this is a prudent, reasonable thing to do, and the board today agreed with that.
But that doesn't answer the question.
Alfonso.
It begs the question, why isn't the NYPD sufficient enough? You say they're fine. Why isn't it sufficient enough?
Dan asked and answered. Alfonso.
Hi, Pat. I think it was Commissioner Herman talked about the rarity of seeing a police officer on a commuter train or a commuter train station. I know you've said you're going to leave the specifics on deployment up to police leadership, but can you share your vision of how much these new officers can make a difference on Long Island Railroad stations? You know, the problems you've heard from commuters there?
Well, I not only hear from commuters, I'm a daily commuter on the Long Island Railroad. I think it's appropriate that some of these new officers patrol MTA, Long Island Railroad and Metro North platform stations and trains. I think that's a good idea. That'll be one of the results here.
Chairman.
Yeah, please. Sorry.
I would be remiss not to ask a question about the police.
Thank you.
Posters, signs went up in the fall that the MTA was hiring 500 officers. So two-part question. One is how many have already been hired as part of this 500? And the second part is...
So Tim Minton will get back to you. I don't have that fact at my fingertips.
And I have one more policing, then another related. But did anything Board Member Jones say today resonate with you about the history of policing communities of color being targeted for fare evasion? 90% of the arrests for fare evasion are people of color. Did any of that?
Yeah, of course. I think Commissioner Jones, since his presence on the board preceded me joining here, I think he's been clear and consistent about it. I've spoken to him about it personally a number of times. I think, as I understand it, Commissioner Jones today was describing his interactions and meeting with the prior MTA Police Department leadership and the prior Transit Bureau leadership. And I think Commissioner Jones is exactly right. And the goal is to do this on a racially non-discriminatory basis, period, across the board. Paul.
Yeah, can I ask just one more question
please.
About police? Sorry. As far as funding for Access-a-Ride, the operating budget is asking the city to pay for half. They've said they won't pay for half. So what does that mean? Is there going to be a cut in Access-a-Ride service? How are you going to cover that? If the city won't pay half, they'll continue to pay.
There is not going to be a cut in paratransit service. Discussions on that issue are continuing, and I expect would continue into January. Paul.
Hi, Pat. I just have a question about the numbers and the budget in relation to the police. You talked about the 88 unfilled positions. So are we to believe that originally, like before the decision to hire the 500 officers, that the 88 unfilled positions weren't budgeted for in earlier financial plans?
Paul, it's an excellent question. Actually, they were budgeted in the July financial plan and approved by the board in the July financial plan. I probably was remiss in not pointing that out to my colleagues today.
Okay.
That was part of the July financial plan.
So then when the decision was taken to hire, as we were told, the 500 officers, we were told it would cost an additional $250 million. Is the $250 million inclusive of the 88, or are we actually talking about $250 million for just over 400 new hires?
No, it's the 250 is for the 500 group of 500.
Inclusive of the 88 unfilled. So it was actually less.
The 88, right, is a use is a use of the resource. But it's 500, 250 over the 4-year period.
And then as far as the headcount goes, I believe the headcount currently is about 780. Does that sound about correct?
I was going to say what's the number?
783 according to Tim.
Thank you.
So what is the target headcount then? When the 500 have been hired, what will the final MTA police headcount be?
Well, look, it's a moving, it moves. And I'll just give you one fact, right? I reported 57 resigned and retired in 2019. We expect 50 to 55 in 2020. I would think that my belief, I think shared by police experts, a number of police officers in this department and others entered after 9/11. So that would be in 2002, 2003. I think it's police officers, many of them retire after 20 years of service because of pensions and other things. So you could see accelerated, retirements. It's going to be a changing number, and that's why Tim had the up-to-date 783. It's going to change.
Right, but the budget there is for a specific headcount. So understanding that people come, people go, people retire, there must be Bob, when he has his numbers, he must know how many people he's accounting for.
Sure. There's a number of police that can be tracked back to the number in the financial plan. For 2020, 21, 20, I don't have it in my fingertips. We can get it for you.
But does Bob have an idea how many police there'll be?
We'll come back to you. We'll get it for you. There's a specific number of police that obviously tracks to that number.
Okay, thank you.
Christina?
To you. So the number 500, adding 500 officers, and whatever target number does exist, where do you get that number from? That number of officers is what's needed to deal with the remaining crimes that we're still seeing every year.
That was after discussions with police leadership and taking into account the resignations, the retirement, the needs. As your colleague from Newsday and I just discussed, there's a need for additional policing on Long Island Railroad and Metro North, stations, platforms, trains, etc. And that number was derived after consultation with police leadership.
And I mean, given the concerns that were raised today about racial bias and who feels safe or who doesn't feel safe around police, on the subway, is there any plans moving forward for how to take those concerns into consideration?
Well, the answer is yes. There will be bias training. There will be reducing attention in terms of interventions. The NYPD and the MTA Police Department do that already.
Right, so how is that any different from what NYPD, we already see?
Well, look, the first group of officers that are being hired are trained officers and experienced officers because they're coming from other police departments, to a significant degree, the NYPD. And the training that the NYPD, which I think is believed to be the nation's best, is training that all these officers have received. Whatever is state-of-the-art training at the time, they'll receive.
Okay. So if people are worried about the way that NYPD treats people of color on trains now, it wouldn't be much different if they have the exact same training for the new police force and the new hires.
Well, look, the expression of dissatisfaction with NYPD training, there are some people who subscribe to that view. I personally think that the NYPD is one of the nation's finest police forces, and the commissioners past and present have been responsive to the issues, and I think we'll be going forward. Rich Lamb, you have a question?
I was just waiting for the microphone. I am curious as to whether or not you are surprised about the level of controversy about hiring new cops.
In a word, yes, period. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Congress passed a defense spending bill last week that will preclude you from buying highly subsidized, cheap train cars from China. There's already a lack of competition in that space. How are you going to deal with that?
So first, your interpretation is completely wrong. You need to look at the NDAA. We don't have any. We've not bought Chinese rail cars. We don't have any plans to do so. They're an eligible vendor, but your statement is completely factually wrong.